early, so yeah, this should be pretty easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well, okay. Well, sorry, Dan. You can leave. We're talking about Nas now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right,
Whatever
I'll see you
that
guys
is.
later.
It was nice having you.
Yeah, it's been real, gentlemen.
All right. Well, peace, dude. All right.
Bye.
Oh man. Yeah.
He's still here.
Awkward. Yeah. Yeah. We
Yeah.
got some good stuff to talk about today. I think we can make it work.
Yeah, if only the oversized spaceship would leave.
Are you talking to me?
I'm sorry. What?
Did you say oversized spaceship?
Yeah. You're a spaceship.
Yeah, but
You're not the
That's-
pilot.
the X-wing's not that big.
No, but you're not the pilot. You're the spaceship.
Somebody tells me you can give us the exact dimensions of an X-wing.
Actually, I don't remember exactly quite how long.
You don't have a blueprint schematic hanging up in your bedroom or something?
No, but I have a tie that has it on there, so give me a second.
Oh, I can't wait for this.
I'm not kidding. Give me a second.
I'm more impressed by the fact that he actually had it somewhere in the recesses of his memory. Like, I don't know off the top of my head, but
It was
I
there
did know at one
somewhere,
point.
yeah.
I used to know.
Let's see here. Consulting the tie right now. This is how ridiculous this is. No, this doesn't give the specifications. It just gives the diagram of everything that's there. Let's see here. S foil servo actuator, S foil assembly for let's see, Incom F4L4 in fusible thrust engines and a few other thousand things. I think it's something like 11 meters long, give or take.
I'll show you my thrust engine.
Oh, good lord!
I'll
Here
show
we
you my
go.
11 meters.
Anywho,
Nice.
well, we just went and ruined it. No, I'm just kidding.
Joe started the stream and didn't tell us.
Oh yeah, by the way, gentlemen, we're live.
We're making all these
Oh,
rude
trust me, yeah,
jokes.
that's normal. That's why that's why I'm watching what I say, because Joe likes to spring it on people that were live.
Yeah, so yeah, long story short, don't mention where we hid the body. Anyway, what's the topic for today?
What was that all about?
So anyway, yeah. Welcome everybody, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, non-specific people. We're welcome back to Dialogue Options number 3. You know, your favorite not podcast. Joined with us as always today is my two lovely co-hosts, Ace X-Wing 88.
Hello.
That's your cue. And Marcamune.
Fuck you.
What's happening, guys? What's
Yep.
up?
And
Yo.
we have, there is another. We have a special guest, our friend, close pal, DocRocker91. How you doing, Doc?
Am I the first guest on your guys' show?
Yes, you are to behave yourself.
Oh, I'm so honored.
Setting the precedent for future guests.
All right, well, I will.
So don't
I will
screw
set
it
the
up.
bar as high as I possibly
Screw it up
can.
massively.
What's up, everybody?
Episode 3, Danton Arlotto is our guest. Episode 4, Shigeru Miyamoto.
Oh no! Don't
good, I can
promise
answer
the
that.
fans
Listen to
Shigeru.
I can ask him why he decided to make ridiculous controls for Star Fox Zero.
I'm sure you're one of many.
Oh, you betcha. That's a story for another day.
So,
Well, as you probably mentioned before, because I have no idea exactly what time Joe actually hit live, we're talking about open world games today and a whole host of different topics about it. You know, talking about like the concept itself. Is it beneficial to certain games? Which games, benefit from it? Which ones does it feel shoehorned in? All kinds of fun stuff to talk about. And we're going to be here for as long as it approximately takes to complete one campaign in Skyrim, so at least a good 40 hours. I think we should be good. That's the weekend, right?
that's not long enough for a Skyrim campaign.
Sure it is if
I'm
you finish just the main quest.
Less.
Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
heck, speedrunners beat Breath of the Wild in what, like 20 minutes or something like
yeah,
that?
but that's speedrunners, Russ.
Well, speedrunning's still a thing that's relevant.
Oh yeah,
Right?
I know.
You can totally speedrun
Right?
open world games,
Okay.
and that completely changes the scope of how you take the journey. You know.
This is true. Speaking of which, that's
Well,
one
that's
thing I
just
do want to
the
talk about with
design.
Breath of the Wild that's interesting. But I mean, Joe,
Well, slow
You're
your
the
roll.
one that-
Slow your roll. Let we
you're
we just
putting the
went
ship
live.
here.
Hold on. Yeah,
So-
yeah. Slow your roll. We just went live. Let people join in. People join in the
Slow
chat.
my roll.
Yeah, we don't-
Impossible.
We don't want to blow our loads that quickly. Also,
Oh,
hi
good
mom.
Lord.
So is there like a chat where people are like commenting
Well,
as we
yeah.
I mean, I have the chat open as we speak, so no one ever comments but me, and I always say hello to my
I
mother.
think you just opened a Pandora's box for Danton.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah, we can get to the we can get to the real show, the showdown later. But I don't know. Does anybody have like anything they want to open with? Anything they want to get off their chest right off the bat?
I don't
Yes,
know. It depends. I
Russ,
mean, because
you're good to go too, because you just started playing Skyrim for the first time a week ago, right?
I did. Yeah, yeah. I started. Yeah, Mark charged me with before the open world episode was going to happen to play at least 5 hours of Skyrim because I bought Skyrim, mind you, back on the Steam Winter Sale when and with the intention of playing it at some point once the summertime rolled around, so I'd have more time to actually get involved with it. He asked me to play 5 hours of it before we did this. I managed to play somewhere. The actual time Steam says I played it is 57 hours.
Oh, man,
Although
60 already?
probably about 15 of that is probably it being on pause and my screen turned off. So
And keep in mind, those are still rookie numbers, kid.
I understand those are still rookie numbers, but in a week's time,
Hey,
that's
it's
an
only been
inordinate
a
amount of
week.
time.
That's basically a full-time work week put into Skyrim. That's
Pretty
insane.
much.
Yeah.
And I'm still just, kind of getting the hang of the game and working out a Whiterun, basically. So, yeah.
Okay, so you're kind of taking your time, letting it burn slow.
Well, whenever I play open world games, and this is kind of interesting too, because I find that when it comes time for open world games, everybody has like their preferred play style of how they handle the game, how they handle building their character, and I tend to be one of those type of open world game players where everything that has a decent amount of value in terms of value efficiency gets taken and sold off to people. So I had a house in Whiterun within like the first day of playing the game. Had enough money for that. Um, so it was one of those things where I crept through the introductory part of the game with probably about 600 pounds of stuff in my inventory.
Oh, jeez.
I crept
you have to
along in a snail's pace.
There you are going looking for merchants to sell it. Half your gameplay is over encumbrance.
Yeah,
That's the
I mean,
stat that Steam should give you. It should give you amount of time played and amount of that time spent walking at 0.08 miles per hour.
oh, I'd be the MVP guaranteed. This is what always gets me in open world games too,
You
is
need those
because
feather
like,
potions.
yeah, I'm trying to work on getting alchemy a little bit better, but the system is not terribly intuitive, with the except of the like trial and error system. So
What
Yeah,
with alchemy?
leveling alchemy, I've always found to be a bit of a drag in Skyrim.
actually, the one thing I saw that was reasonable to go for is in the pickpocketing skill line. Once you get to level 50, I believe it is, there's a skill that gives you an extra 100 pounds of weight that you can carry.
Yeah, that's not
Oh,
worth it
yeah.
because you can always
Yeah, you have to get like 5 or 6 other perk points. before
yeah,
you can get
it's
There's
no, hold
only-
on,
there's
Russ,
only
but
two.
But even still, it's not necessarily worth it because you can spec into enchanting and then enchant your pieces of armor to increase your carry capacity so much more than just one perk. So
That's
those
true.
those
But, I mean, I'm
those
gonna-
perks are better spent elsewhere, to be honest.
I guess, but at least that's what I'm looking into for right now. So I'm kind of
That's
Yeah,
Russ's
the perk
build,
system
though. It's
alone,
not
I mean-
about strength and magic with Russ. It's about how can I carry as much shit as possible. So he's actually building efficiently right now by going for that pickpocketing. skill.
Yeah, I mean, if that's your play style where you just hoard all of the shit in Tamriel, then I mean,
Well, I don't hoard all of it. I normally like to keep at least like one item of each like thing that I find in my in the storage, but everything else gets sold.
mhm.
So basically, I can have like a
Little
collection
kitty's
of one of each.
collection. It's adorable.
Yeah, okay, yeah. This is my Pokedex, but it's in Skyrim. So
Oh, and Russell, a little tip with
Yes.
the alchemy. The amount of experience that you get per potion is based on the value of the potion that you create.
well, that makes sense actually. And this is funny. I remember watching Danton and you, Mark, also play Skyrim about a decade ago in college, and
back where you lived together.
And
It's
the rest of the world
exactly.
was playing it.
it's
Exactly.
been 10 years you've been wanting to play this game.
I know. And the kicker is that, I remember the concept of like, well, if you want to raise your smithing skill, just, craft a bunch of iron daggers. Well, here it turns out they actually changed it. So now the value of the item actually goes into how much how much it levels up your smithing skill.
Yeah, they've patched that out a while back. Yeah.
Which is
So-
kind of a shame
Even
because the
with
first thing I
patching,
found, I'm like, I'm going to make a bunch of iron
one the
daggers.
Best ways to increase your skill.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the same time, it kind of makes sense because you're gonna be eventually being able to make the best stuff in the game, and doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again will not necessarily mean that you're that good of a smith. It just means you're very good at making iron daggers.
Yes, but
Right.
true.
I
You have to.
remember my second playthrough really early in the game when it first came out. So I decided to go for that. And I remember like 97 iron daggers, 98, 99, dragon armor.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden you can make this ridiculous stuff.
Oh, I know.
It's
Yeah.
probably good that they
Awesome.
patched it because it doesn't make sense, like you're saying. Just like you make all these iron daggers, and then one day you're just making the best top tier armor and weapons in the game. Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of funny too because like I remember watching you guys play this years ago and kind of just putting it back in the recesses of my mind, but all those memories come flooding back. Like I remember Danton, your character, Swiftfoot, the Argonian, who
Yeah,
literally
yeah, I
could
was a
sneak
stealth
in
player.
plain sight in front of people.
Uh-huh.
Named after
Yeah, like-
Swiftfoot Boots from Magic the Gathering.
That's
Uh huh.
right. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
I put a lot of thought into naming my characters. I try to like really get into like, especially with Elder Scrolls, like the
Yes,
real
you
role
should.
playing aspect of it. Like if I'm making like an elf character, make a name that sounds like all the other elf characters' names in the world. So like with the Argonians, they kind of go for this sort of like Native American aesthetic where, like all sort. Like I remember when I did an Argonian for ESO, Elder
Mhm.
Scrolls Online, and I ended up in the spirit of Swiftfoot, I named him Swift and Pointed because he was like another kind of stealthy sort of guerrilla warfare kind of character,
Mhm.
and the
Yeah,
name
yeah.
itself was a double entendre. Go figure.
Yeah, it's funny they mention that because I do something similar. I try to make my names fitting, and like I still want to make an Argonian in ESO, but similarly I want to make him like I have one in mind that's it's like a few words separated by hyphens. Like I get into it the same way.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah, that's exactly what I did, and I've always done that. Argonians are some of my favorites, but it's basically Argonians and elves for me. But I remember like in other Elder Scrolls games, dabbling with other races and doing the same kind of thing, like make an orc and give him like this real kind of like orcish tribal
Yeah.
sounding name, and
Mhm.
really like lay into that lore aspect of it. I've always really enjoyed that.
Oh yeah, and Elder Scrolls is a perfect opportunity to do it because there is so much lore out there to pull from when you're making a name.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Well, here's an interesting thing that we could do to go around the board. When you're playing like an open world, kind of traditional like fantasy type of game, like an Elder Scrolls, how would you guys build your characters? Like, what's your ideal go-to for something like that? What's your play styles?
Are we talking like a traditional like fantasy RPG?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
Okay.
Kind
let's
of in the
say-
vein of Skyrim, right? Or kind
Yeah,
of in the vein of
mean-
like an Elder Scrolls game.
right. Imagine Elder
Yeah, like medieval
Scrolls.
and World of Warcraft kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean any kind of fantasy type of RPG. What kind of character that you tend to gravitate towards?
Let's start from left to right. So let's start with you, Ace.
So for me, it's always kind of a bit of a hodgepodge because I tend to do a few different things most of the time with my character. Most of my characters usually wind up becoming a kind of like a medium to heavy weight paladin type, where usually they are like two-handed great swords and healing magic, but usually a mix of heavy and medium or heavy armor. But I always wind up speccing into the ability to lockpick. So my characters in most of those type of games usually wind up becoming like chaotic good. Like he's gonna go save the world, but he also needs cash to buy armor. So that's what usually winds up happening.
He's gonna save the world in a minute, but he's just broke right now.
Yeah,
He's weighed down from all of his over encumbrance.
As a matter of fact, that's why usually like whenever I play games like that, whether it be Skyrim recently or like Kingdom Come Deliverance, The Witcher, even Breath of the Wild to some extent, even though that is a bit different. I usually wind up being in a situation where there's like three distinct phases of me playing through the game. There's me getting started and trying to just scrounge anything I can for money, and then the mid game where I spend the majority of my time just building my character, and the end game where I've got everything pretty much set at that point, and the money doesn't mean anything anymore. But so that I can do a little bit of everything, I build the character to be not a jack of all trades. I typically don't go for any kind of major sorcery stuff. I'm not much of a magic player, which isn't going to be in direct opposite to what Danton typically does. But that's how I typically build my character, and that's how I'm building him now. He's a Breton, so he has the ability to absorb magicka, so he can definitely be more tanky. But I'm essentially building him like a Jedi in Elder Scrolls. So uses a sword, can heal himself, and uses some magic and some shouts, and occasionally a bow and arrow for long distance.
Nice.
All right. What about you, Joe?
Yeah, so normally, back when Skyrim first came out, I was all about like the heavy two-handed type stuff. But as I got older, I kind of like became more and more drawn to like the whole spell sword kind of play style, where you use like the one-handed sword and stuff, and then offensive magic abilities for like that added distance. So, and even when I go back and play like older games like Final Fantasy VII, like I played Cloud as a spell sword character, and it turned out really, really nice because I do really like those magic user type playstyle characters now, because of the flexibility of them, I think. Because they can be whatever you want them to be. You can have them be offensive. You can have them be defensive or support.
I think that's the main thing, yeah.
And so I
I
really like the flexibility of like a magic character, but also instead of having them be like that glass cannon, like pure mage character, have that a little bit of extra defense. So like if I were to fire up Skyrim right now, I would, spec into light armor and one-handed, and then destruction, conjuration, and alteration, stuff like that.
Okay.
And my races that I typically will pick will either be Bretons or High Elves, so for extra magic, depending on how deep I want to go into the magic stuff.
Okay.
Cool
Danton?
stuff.
Yeah, right on. Well, as far as like Elder Scrolls character building goes, I'm like right in tow with Joe, honestly, on a lot of that. I have a very, very similar play style and very similar preferences. Generally speaking, in all kinds of like role-playing games, I always do magic. Funny enough, I very seldom do exclusively magic, so I don't like the pure like mage build. I always like something that's a little bit more hybridized. So kind of like what Joe was saying, like making like a spell sword. Like, all right, let me make like a sorcerer character that can also swing a sword. In the case of, going back to that Argonian guy I made, he was mainly like a stealth kind of rogue, Nightblade sort of dude, but there was a lot of magic in his build as well. Whether that be my Skyrim guy or my online play guy, they're both kind of the same sort of character archetype. So for me, I always lean very heavily into the magic side of the triangle, just because I think it's really cool. I always liked the idea of spell casting and wizardry and all that kind of cool stuff, conjuring stuff, fireballs, lightning bolts, all that sort of stuff. Even like my most combat heavy characters always have tons of magic. My Oblivion character that I made, I used a Dark Elf, which the Dark Elves are my favorite. They're my favorite race to play with, because they pretty much fit that mold very nicely.
They're cool. They're usually good with fire too.
Yeah,
which is perfect for you.
They always have good destruction magic boosts. They resist fire, so there's always that. And they can summon ancestral ghosts to like fight with them. So that goes into like you could kind of like do that, and then you could use conjuration to get another guy, and you could have a whole little army of squad with you the whole time. So, and then they're really good with swords and bows. So they're a nice mix of everything, and I've always really liked that. And I like them aesthetically. Especially like so many other Elder Scrolls people. My first big time Elder Scrolls game was Morrowind, so I've always had a soft spot for the Dunmer. So so like my Oblivion character was like pretty much started off as like a real traditional spell sword. So like long blade, destruction magic, light armor. And I eventually kind of molded him by late game. I ended up getting into like a real kind of heavy tanky build for him. And at this point he had like so much mastery on all the arcane arts that, I ended up like having all these like crazy enchanted armor pieces and like these super enchanted weapons and like all this crazy stuff. So he was just a magic machine, but he was also really heavily leaned on the combat side of things. But yeah, as far as like specifically looking at like my ideal Skyrim build, I'm currently doing a playthrough now. Funny enough, talking with Russ about his first playthrough got me thinking about my current playthrough that I'm still working on. I was like, I should blow the dust off that and try to finish it. So I'm going through the Switch version. I got that when
Oh,
it came
nice.
out, when it launched, and I decided because I did one full playthrough with my Argonian back in the day when it first launched, and then I decided to make a second character who was a dark elf, and then I kind of went more like the spell sword trick, and I went more like a lot more like offense. Since now I had a pretty good lay of the game and the combat system and everything, so I ended up making this like real wicked, like dual wielding, one handed, um, always using the elemental fury shout for faster melee strikes, and like all like the magic sort of boosting into like that sort of thing, and just being this more of a glass cannon, sure, but more of like just this like spinning death machine.
Yeah, you're a
You
know,
DPS machine.
and I,
Dervish.
yeah, and I really enjoyed that playstyle with him. And for whatever reason, I never finished. I kind of lost interest after just playing so much Skyrim in such a short span of time. I
Yeah.
never finished that playthrough. So when I got the Switch version, I figured let me kind of like go back and remake that second build I did and try to stick with that. So that's what I'm doing now. So I
Give-
finished.
How's
Give
it?
a new lease on life, yeah.
And how does it
Yeah.
run on the Switch?
Uh, to be honest, not great. It's pretty sluggish, and I've had it crash a couple times.
Damn.
Which
That's
is really weird on a
surprising,
console
'cause-
game. But yeah, I mean, it's cool playing it in portable mode. Totally, it looks fantastic, and for the most part, it plays relatively well. I actually, funny enough, despite being like a big Nintendo junkie and amiibo guy collector, I haven't used any of the amiibo functionality in
Oh,
Skyrim.
wasn't
I
there
know
one where like you could get one that looked like Link from Breath of the Wild in
Well,
there?
yeah, you
And
could
it
get
looked
like the
awful.
champion tunic and the master sword and the Hylian shield. I was like, I don't want to do any of that stuff. I want to like play Skyrim. I just want to play it on my Switch. So I'm doing like a
Anton,
super
don't you
traditional
want
elf
don't you
build.
want to be Link in Skyrim?
No, if I want to be Link, I'm just gonna play Breath of the Wild because
I
enjoy
remember
that
seeing
game
the
far, far more.
the commercial, I think, when they first advertised Skyrim on the Switch, and they showed that Zelda content, and they
Mhm.
showed like some like long-haired blonde Nord guy dressed up to he was supposed to look like Link, I guess, but he really just
He
looked like
really didn't.
he really just looked like a homeless guy cosplaying as Link.
That's what it looked like. Yeah.
That's pretty fair.
Yeah, but I mean that's cool. You like to play your characters that way. Yeah, for me personally, I think I fall in line similarly to Joe and Dan. You know, I like to specifically in Elder Scrolls, I like to be more of a battle mage because in those games they kind of let you do everything. You can if you play it for long enough that you get enough skill points that you can kind of make yourself pretty generalized but still really strong.
Mhm.
So yeah, when I play Elder Scrolls, for example, my typical character is I'll go in there with heavy armor, sword and board, and I'll also have strong destruction magic. Um, usually, I'll swap out my sword, usually for the spell hand
Mhm.
to hit things with spells and stuff like that. And then I'll do restoration magic to keep myself healed. Of course,
Gotcha.
that's mainly what I do. But I like to kind of major in close quarters melee combat. I'm always a sword guy personally.
Yeah.
Whenever I have any kind of melee character, it always has to be a sword for me. I've never gotten into axes or maces
Yeah,
or
and I
any,
mean,
any-
Yeah, I'm
anything
kind of
like
the
that.
same.
yeah, and I mean specifically speaking for Skyrim, swords and daggers were always really good with the DPS. I mean, unless you were role playing, axes and maces were kind of, I don't want to say redundant, but they weren't quite as good unless you were playing it on the VR version, whereas, you want to use, instead of, well, so basically, the way that it kind of works with the VR version is instead of the swing animations determining how quickly you can deal damage with weapons, it's as quickly as you can swing the controller to.
Okay.
Yeah, so like if you probably, I'm sure if you go on YouTube and look up some people playing the VR version of Skyrim, you'll see them just wiggling their their sledgehammer weapons really quickly, and they're dealing tons of damage simply just because it's not tied to the animations. So
Right.
Or the weight of the weapon. Yeah,
right, yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah.
that's
So
funny.
yeah, but I don't even think about it like in a min-maxing sense or the total damage output, like what's truly best for me. whenever I play games like that, I've always gravitated towards swords. I mean, you can tell by my little profile picture. I kind of like swords a lot.
Yeah, I
So
can
Yeah.
respect
Wait,
that.
you like
There's
swords?
definitely a certain like nobility and prestige that comes with being a swordsman compared
Sorry.
to like swinging a giant hammer or an axe around. Like those weapons just seem like relatively more crude. By
Yeah,
me playing
they're.
Smash.
yeah.
They seem
Sword has,
almost
like,
more.
all like the epic heroes or swordsmen, you know.
Yeah.
And you want to know the great irony of it though is that like all this stuff is born out of like the medieval fantasy genre of swords, whereas swords were not a terribly common. And I wouldn't say they weren't terribly common, but they weren't like one of the most prominent weapons on a medieval battlefield. That would be like the spear, or as a matter of fact, I hardly ever seen these games have anything available to you like a spear or a halberd as a main weapon. It's
Yeah.
always either the sword,
Well,
mace, or
you
the
have
axe.
to
That's it.
backtrack a little bit and play some older Elder Scrolls games if you want to get that fix.
Yeah.
Because Morrowind had all that stuff in spades.
Morrowind also had stamina drain for running,
It
so
sounded like you
Yeah.
wanted to jump in with something, Joe.
Oh yeah, no, I was just gonna say, like, historically speaking, when it comes to swords, like those required like years of training to be able to master. Because I was, and funnily that we mentioned swords, I was watching a Shadiversity video on how good Rurouni Kenshin's sword would actually be in real life, and he spent a lot of time talking about katanas and like their natural edge, and he said that katanas naturally, because of the way that the swords are structured and the curvature, they're more forgiving on the plane of the edge, because it naturally wants to kind of straighten itself out. So
That's interesting.
yeah, and so when you're thinking about, like, say, medieval longswords, they're a little bit more unwieldy to an untrained hand, because you need to kind of get your technique down to be able to swing effectively and make sure that your edge is perpendicular with your target, because otherwise your sword's going to hit on the flat side of your sword, and it's going to bounce off your target.
Yeah, definitely.
that's
Yeah,
one of the reasons you would see axes and maces being fairly common, even sometimes more than swords. And the funny part is that we all kind of think of it as that like kind of a trash weapon by comparison to a sword, because a sword just looks better.
It's more elegant looking.
Yeah, in my
Civilized
opinion.
weapon for a civilized
definitely-
age.
Yeah, it's definitely subjective, but to me, the sword represents just like that standard, that classic, badass fantasy weapon.
Absolutely.
And I mean, it's just thinking back, like, in all of these, like, stories and legends, you think back to, Arthur and Excalibur, Aragorn and, I can't believe I'm blanking on the name of his sword. Here, give me a minute. I gotta Google this, because I cannot talk about Lord of the Rings.
You're supposed to be the Lord of the Rings nerd out of all the four of us here.
Hang on. I'm gonna kill myself. Oh, Arundel. No, wait. Yeah, Arundel. What's the name of his sword? Can't believe I forgot about that. Bad me. Bad cat.
You should be ashamed of yourself.
Well,
Yeah, don't ask me. If we ever do a podcast about movies, you and I might, you and I will have wildly different opinions of the Lord of the Rings movies.
Oh boy.
we will.
Yeah, that's for another day, though.
Oh, I feel another
Yeah,
heated
it's just
discussion
a
coming on.
curiosity. Mark, are you like not a big fan or what?
Well, honestly, I'm not even equipped to like go toe to toe in a full conversation about it, because I've only watched them each once.
Have you
Okay.
seen the extended or the theatrical cuts?
The extended ones.
And
What
Yeah.
was your first impression?
Too long.
oh,
and boring.
stop! We have 3-hour
that's okay,
podcasts,
bro.
and they're
A lot of people have that.
Okay, well maybe all right. So it's not fair to say too long, because if it was something I was enjoying, then I would say not long enough. Give me more. So I'm just gonna say it was too boring for me.
It felt too long for you. I get it.
And you know what? To some extent, I can understand that, because even the source material, like those books, are
It's
very,
dense.
very dense. The
Very,
world
very
building
dense.
is amazing, but it is so dense. So you already have to be kind of invested in the concept of it.
yeah. Tolkien was a
in order-
master of world
They have to be
building.
the modern day embodiment of an ent to
Well, the
really
funny part is
appreciate
that, like,
Tolkien.
the majority of the stuff we're talking about with these medieval fantasies, a lot of that lore, while was based off of other like Norse mythology prior to Tolkien's books, A lot of it's
Well, I
based
don't
off of
want
Lord
to
of
go
the
off on
Rings.
a huge tangent about this. Essentially, my take is like I see Lord of the Rings as BBC's Planet Earth with swords. That's how I
Hey,
see
there
it.
you go.
Okay.
Okay.
It
Nothing
looks
wrong
it
with
looks
that
great.
analogy.
It looks like something I want to watch, but
It doesn't
mm,
quite hook you
it
in like
it
something
doesn't
else would.
resonate with me. No,
That's fair.
it really I think it really boils down to the character building for me mainly is the big sore point. But
Do you think?
anyway, we're talking about
Wait.
some games here.
Okay.
Oh, boy,
Yeah.
I'm
here
not
we
getting
go.
off that
Oh.
high. I'm not getting
No,
off
you're not.
Oh. The character
I think you
building
just
in the
hurt Joe personally.
yeah, the character building is like the strong. I think it's the strongest part of the films. You know,
Really?
like
Because I
read the
think it's
book?
the weakest point.
when was the
Oh,
last
this
time
is
you?
gonna be good.
When was the
I'll get
last
my
time you
popcorn.
watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Mark?
I was late to it because when it first came out, I think I actually had the same experience as you, Dan. I think my family rented the first movie or something, and we were watching it, and it got to the part where like Gandalf was fighting the
Balrog.
Balrog.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like I just lost interest. I walked away and I went and played with toys or something.
Huh.
I think you had a similar experience, and then you came back to it later. Except I know you enjoy those movies, Stan. But
Yeah.
I
For
came
me,
back
my
yeah.
first Lord of the Rings romp was a one sitting marathon through the entire extended trilogy
Oh,
with
God.
some friends.
Jeez,
And this
that's
was
what
just
happened
like a year or two ago. It was really recent that I did this, but I loved it to pieces, and I want to do that again several
Yeah,
times.
for
And try
me,
to
I
catch
watched the
up I missed.
extendeds. I think I watched them like late college, so this was about 10 or so years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think I watched like Return of the King for the first time, like the summer after I got out of college, maybe or around that time frame.
Okay.
But yeah, it wasn't too long ago. Like I was an adult at the time. I wasn't like a kid anymore. I was in a position where I could fully appreciate it.
Mm.
Because here's the thing, that's when like Game of Thrones was new and that was really popular, and I loved the character of Ned Stark.
Oh, it's Sean
So-
Bean.
Yeah.
How could you
well,
not?
and Ned Stark
Yeah.
is a very well developed character too. So yeah, Ned Stark is my favorite character in the entire series.
The
So
main reason why I wanted to watch Lord of the Rings to begin with was because Ned Stark, of course, doesn't make it
He
Oh,
plays
God,
season one
Mark.
in Game of
Faramir,
Thrones.
right?
Mark,
And I
my
was
girlfriend.
so disappointed. I was so disappointed. I was just like, okay, where else can I see Sean Bean? I need to see this
I
actor
feel like
in
a
more
cool
things.
sword wielding hero. Yeah.
So
Mark.
I do a Google search and I see Sean Bean. He was in Lord of the Rings. I really
Mhm.
have to give this a second try. I want to see this
Oh, you poor
character
thing.
live.
Oh God, you poor
You
summer child.
poor thing.
Boy, was I wrong.
Uh huh.
Yeah,
You
boy,
know,
you got
it-
shorted. You got the short end of the Sean Bean stick.
You know, I
Yeah, I did, yeah.
I'd like to point out that even though Sean Bean basically dying in whatever he's in is a joke at this point, it's a recurring meme. There is one movie I've seen where he did not die.
National treasure.
National Treasure.
He was
Fucking
in
It had
National
to be.
Treasure.
Yeah.
Yep, he was the bad guy. Nicolas Cage was the good guy because apparently, who the hell knows what that film? And here's the better part: it was a Disney film, so who the hell saw that coming?
Oh man.
Yeah,
But,
well,
uh,
I remember
anyway,
hearing somebody
yeah.
say that, like, "Oh, the only movie he didn't die in, he was a bad guy." I didn't realize it was National Treasure, though. That's funny.
So
Yeah.
that was my take, and like I said, I watched those movies about 10 years ago. Do you have a response for me, Joe?
Probably.
Well, I'm gonna start things off by saying my girlfriend just texted me and she said Mark's analysis of the Lord of the Rings is accurate to a point. So I feel betrayed by two of my favorite people.
That's all right. You could feel betrayed by three of your favorite people. I'll tell you, the movies were kind of slow paced as well. So
That's okay.
Damn,
You're a
it's not your
ship.
day, Joe.
Yeah.
It's okay. Well,
Well,
I will say though, like just given the actual lore and the world building really plays heavily into a lot of these games that we're kind of talking about, we do owe it a bit of a debt of gratitude. But the books are very dense, and the films, if you're watching the extended edition, you really have to be invested in what you're watching because it
Mhm.
is the pacing is a little tough.
Well, the thing is, I adore those books. They are they hold a special place in my heart as like the how to do world building. And if you know me and you know how much I like writing, I love world building. So the Lord of the Rings just kind of like hits that sweet spot for me. And as far as the films are concerned, I can't not watch the extended cuts anymore. And every so often, I go back to those films, and I find something new in them that I hadn't noticed, and it just makes me fall in love with them all over again. You know,
Yeah. Well,
when
to be fair, I hear the books do a better job of building the world and the characters than the movies.
yeah,
Yeah,
because Tolkien will
That basically
spend
goes without saying.
yeah, and Tolkien goes to on to like spend pages upon pages just talking about the setup for Bilbo's party in the Fellowship of the Ring. So, it's like
He paints a vivid picture.
yeah, and that's how I like my world building, and I understand, like, as a younger person, like if when I was a kid and in like 5th grade when I first discovered Lord of the Rings, I couldn't get through them because it was too much for me. But as an adult, I went back to read them, and I was like, Jesus Christ, these are amazing. You know?
Yeah, that's something I still have to do because I had the same problem. Because I started The Hobbit and was like, "This is so cool," but it was just so thick, and I couldn't get through it. But now
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
like, now
they
as an
made me-
adult, I'm like, I could probably go back and actually process what I'm reading
Yeah.
here. And
The
probably
Hobbit was
really
assigned
enjoy it.
school reading for me one year, and
Oh God.
I thought I was in luck. I thought, okay, The Hobbit, this might actually be good. You know, it's some fantasy stuff. This might be in my wheelhouse. I might enjoy this. And then, I read 50 pages of the heroes, drinking and singing songs with the elves in the forest. I was like, this is not getting me. This is not getting me there. It's not
That's
getting.
what Bilbo Baggins hates.
Yeah, it's seriously 50 pages of them singing in the forest. I'm like, come on,
Yeah,
guys. I thought
snatching
you have a
up the
dragon to
plates
kill.
and eating all of Bilbo's food.
Did I ever tell you guys like the story of how I even wound up starting to read the first book in the first place?
I don't think so.
So I may have told Joe this, but and he probably had this too. Back when I was in middle school, we had this accelerated reader program, and so you had to read like a certain number of books per marking period and take a test on it and get a certain number of points. And I was that soon like, what book is worth all of the points I need for one marking period? So I was like, okay, the only
Bible.
one on here is the Lord of the Rings. I'm like, the Fellowship of the Ring. I'm like, okay, I'll read the book. I'll get it. And I get the book from the library, start reading. I'm like, this book is too long. I'll watch the movie that just came out. I'll just watch that and then I'll take the test on. Watch the movie, proceeded to be like, I have no idea what's going on. Took the test, failed miserably. But the funny part is I actually just watched them over the wintertime. And I do have to say, at least for the theatrical versions, the pacing is definitely much better. I knew the general story because I'd always gotten to them in bits and pieces from seeing them on television. But I could definitely understand that, like, it feels like long periods of no action with small moments of action involved. So it's definitely not an action film. It just has moments of action to it.
Yeah, there's certainly slow burns, and those points of the film where it slows down, that's where you're really like connecting with the characters and getting that character development. So
I'm just gonna go ahead and put it on record that like the best character in the films is Samwise Gamgee anyway. So
I
it's Sean
would
Astin.
I would disagree with you to a point.
No,
Sam,
Joe.
no,
Joe,
no, hold on.
It's Sean Astin. That's all you need to know.
Samwise is definitely one of my favorite characters, but I think the character that has the most profound impact on the entire series is actually Boromir. You know, like, think about it. Like, he goes through an entire arc in that one whole movie, and then his memory is still there, and he affects the story even after he dies, and even up to the point where, you know, it's at the Return of the King with his father and Faramir, like that relationship where their father like treated Boromir like the favorite son, and it just it's so good. It's so good.
Joe, Sean Astin was Rudy. He was in the Goonies. You're not winning this.
So back to open world games.
Yeah, let's take that as
Anywho.
let's take that as our 40-minute introduction to the podcast. So, welcome everyone.
Hey,
So I mean, I'll tell you what. Why don't we start off with like talking about the actual concept of open world games as a vehicle for, you know, an actual gameplay style. Like, you know, what we like about it, what we're not so crazy about it.
Well,
Just
let's
discussion about the Elder Scrolls and things like that.
well, let's first establish exactly what an open world game is. So, how would we define what an open world game is?
I would say that it is, well, as the name states, it's a game that gives you access to a wide open world to explore where nearly everything is accessible from the beginning. So you're in this world, you can go in any direction you want, go to any town,
At your
visit
own
any
pace.
yeah,
From
at
the
your
from the
own pace.
beginning, I think is a real important keyword
Yeah,
that
for
Mark just
sure.
said.
Yeah, because I would definitely, because I was thinking about how I would um, differentiate it when you compare it to something that would be called a sandbox game. And I would say something like a sandbox game would be a good example of that is Grand Theft Auto. At least
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the ones from like the PS2 era, for example, where let's say you have 3 areas of a city, and sure, yeah, you have some freedom in that first part of the city to explore, but you can't go to the part two until you proceed to a certain part in the story.
Hmm.
You're kind of gated there. So that would kind of define the sandbox for me. Whereas with an open world game, you can contrast that and say that it's wide open and you have access to pretty much anything. I mean, if you go up to the door that happens to be the final dungeon of the game, like, yeah, they're going to have that locked until you hit a certain point. But
Unless you're playing Breath of the Wild.
No, yeah.
yeah, right. Well, yeah, but
Well,
pretty
that
much
actually
that
is a
freedom.
drastic deviation from other games like that. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I pretty much said the piece. You know, you can go in any direction you want, lots of freedom, and you're not really barred from anything.
Well,
Yeah,
you know
no,
what?
like
It's
that.
kind of funny that you've made that distinction, because initially when I came up with this idea for the topic, my first instinct was to kind of go towards, all right, what started open world games? Well, the first things that come to my mind were the popularity with the Grand Theft Auto series,
Mhm.
and then that jumping off point with, Spider-Man 2. And we saw how well Spider-Man 2 kind of went, and that's kind of where I saw the beginnings, little fledgling open world games start to crop up. You know, I feel like open world games weren't really much of a thing prior to that.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'll
No,
say
no, no,
that
no.
for
Go ahead.
no. What I was gonna say is that like it's tough to kind of parse exactly where the concept of an open world game as what we consider it now, or at least where the concept started in its core concept. Because I mean, you can even argue to some extent that the original Legend of Zelda was kind of an open world game to some extent. Now progression was gated by certain items, so I guess maybe that would make it more of a sandbox. But you could pretty much go anywhere. The question is, were you equipped to handle wherever you were going?
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
Russ, you pretty much read my mind. I was gonna mention that at some point, especially the more that we get into like this kind of like general kind of defining topic.
Hmm.
I'm gonna talk a lot about Zelda games because they're kind of my thing. But yeah, so like it's really hard to pinpoint where like it wasn't like platformers is one thing, right?
Hmm.
Okay, so Nintendo did Super Mario Bros. In 1985, and like that day the game launched, like a genre was born. Yeah, there were games that had platforming before it, but like it wasn't until 85 that like then you had like every other spin-off under the sun for the NES be some kind of platformer.
Yeah.
So I don't really know if that same phenomenon happened with open world games though. I feel like they're just kind of sprinkled here and there, and it wasn't until probably like the 2000s, maybe like 6th or 7th gen, where like now you're starting to see them popping up enough that they're starting to become a prominent factor in the gaming universe. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, probably because they just didn't have the technology
That was yeah, exactly.
to make a game with that kind of depth to make you feel like you're in this huge world.
Yeah.
Yeah, like by comparison, the original Zelda or even Zelda 2 or Link to the Past, for the time, those games were massive worlds. By today's standards, it's like, oh, I can get from one side of Hyrule to the other in like 7 minutes. In Link to the Past, that's not very long. So, but at the time, that was a massive world and a massive area to explore. But I think you're right. I think the technology part of it was a big one. But
Mhm.
I weren't there some PC games that were
There,
like, why not? I never played it, but why does the name Baldur's Gate keep coming up in my head?
I don't
I don't
know.
know if that was open world at all or not.
I've never
So,
played Baldur's Gate, so I couldn't tell you.
I don't
But
either.
there,
I don't know.
kind of, related to Skyrim, Elder Scrolls 2, Daggerfall was probably one of the earlier, I guess, open world games, because that was
Yeah,
a
and
massive game, and that came out in
I heard it was
'96.
massive. Yeah,
Mhm. It's
Oh, yeah,
it's
like even by
Daggerfall was
today's
bigger than, like,
standards, I heard that they made that a huge world.
it was
absolutely,
pretty
yeah.
much. It's literally like the size of all three of the main accessible areas of ESO. Like,
jeez, are you
could go
serious?
all across Tamriel. It's
God
insane
damn.
how big they made that
What
game.
year
And
did that come out?
it
96.
was like mid 90s.
96.
Was that for
96.
PC?
It was PC,
Yeah.
and it was the way they made it work and the way they offset a lot of programming challenges is they had a lot of the towns and NPCs be random number generated.
Oh, they did the procedural type of deal.
Yeah, so every time you go through the game, it's a different experience. Now I've never played it. I have a friend who's a huge fan of it and swears by it and showed me tons of footage of it and showed me his copy, and I've gone down the YouTube rabbit hole and found things about it too, just to kind of explore it. It's one of those games that I'll probably never play, but I'll always have respect for what it accomplished, and especially given that it paved the way for the franchise to continue with the games that I do play.
Yeah, they should definitely remake that with today's technology and see what they could do with it today. I don't know.
I feel that they really kind of captured the essence of what it can do with the Elder Scrolls Online. I feel like that's kind of what they were going for. Kind of like, let's find a way to take what we had with Daggerfall and like bring it into like a more modern game space.
Yeah, but as we know, ESO is more MMO than Elder Scrolls. It'd be nice to see that kind of huge Elder Scrolls world with the kind of gameplay you would expect from the series.
Yeah, well, there's definitely plenty of fan requests and theories that that's going to be what we can come to expect from the Elder Scrolls 6.
Whew.
What, to be like similar like size to ESO, but not an MMO?
Yeah,
you
like
mean?
a lot of fans are speculating that it's going to be like not just a specific area like Skyrim or Cyrodiil or something like that, but it's going to be the entirety of Tamriel.
Interesting.
Part of why they've been taking so long to develop it.
It'll come up by about the time I hit 40 years old, I'm sure. So
there's lots of evidence that points toward that, but we can't really be sure until we hear it from the horse's mouth, honestly. So
You mean from the Todd's mouth?
Hod Tower.
Yes, the Howard's mouth.
The Howard's mouth, yeah.
The Howard's horse.
Well, right now we just get like the 50th version of Hod Tower's groovy Snowland adventure. So
Yeah, well, I mean, if they're
Yeah.
really working on something that massive, and that's really what they've been doing all these years, instead of just reselling Skyrim, then maybe it'll pay off.
Well, this is where all your Skyrim dollars were going into, hopefully.
Yeah, I have faith that it will pay off. I feel like there's a really good reason that it's taking so long.
well, don't forget too that Bethesda was just bought by Microsoft, weren't they?
Yep.
Yes.
So that could only mean somewhat good things, I hope, in terms of like at least quality control. Fallout 76. So
Bethesda's never really been big on that quality control. Let's be real here.
what's quality control?
Todd Howard shows up with the very first disc before it goes into mass production for the latest Elder Scrolls game. All right, here it is, Microsoft. Todd, this disc is on fire. This is literally on fire.
Todd, this is a donut.
Oh my
Jelly
God.
donut.
But it just
Camera
works.
pans back to Todd Howard. There's a bite out of it.
It,
And
it,
jelly all
it
over
just
his face.
works.
What are you talking about?
Oh my
It's
God.
delicious, right?
Yep.
They'll be selling like hotcakes.
The games are gonna play how this tastes.
Oh jeez.
Amazing.
I mean, the funny part is that like, we kind of joke about Skyrim being made for like every device imaginable. Like I'm pretty sure like they made a Super Nintendo version of Skyrim like 5 years back. But the thing
That
is
would
that
actually be pretty dope.
I know. But the thing is that like, games like this, they take so long to create. I mean, it's not surprising that there's some bugs here and there, but if I remember correctly, when Skyrim first came out, wasn't there some sort of major issue with the PlayStation version that like after a while the game just would not function correctly anymore? Like it was just
I
lagging
think
so much.
what it was, the file size would get too large with the amount of assets that you would have stored in the game's memory, and so that way it kind of really bogged down the performance.
Yeah, and the thing is that to make games of this size, it takes so much time, and yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that kind of feels kind of repeated. I guess we'll talk about those Radiant quests soon enough, but it's kind of interesting because for a game of that type, it's such an interesting experience, but it takes so long to make. It's not like making a platform when you could slap one out every 2 years, basically, if even that, and call it a day like we did in the '90s. What, this Elder Scrolls game has been in development since 2011, pretty much.
Probably.
That's kind of crazy to imagine,
Mm.
But I mean, just kind of piggybacking off of what you guys are saying, I think you're right about the concept of what makes what makes an open world game and what constitutes it, I think it's the ability of being able to kind of, being able to go anywhere and just let the world open up to you. But I think a big part of it for most open world games, as much as it may not be a thing that's a true intention of it, is the fact that you can kind of get lost in the world and forget about the main story for a bit. That's what a lot of them seem to have in common.
Yeah, that's that ludonarrative dissonance that I'd like to touch upon later on in the cast.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I think about, even the way you guys are talking about playing Skyrim, and I'm like, yeah, it's a fairly straightforward main quest. You spend most of the time with side quests, and I'm like, okay. And the funny part is, I don't feel any like major compunction to be like, I got to finish the main quest right now. It's more like I just want to explore and see every area first, and then figure out what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, unfortunately, what happens with, especially the way the Skyrim quest lines are structured, you get some real awesome stuff for doing the quests. So I
Mhm.
did like the typical Elder Scrolls player approach on my first playthrough, where I like did all the side quest stuff and like dabbled in this, that, and the other thing, and took probably upwards of 80 to 100 hours to even get close to the end of the main quest. And by the
Mhm.
time I got to it, I was like over leveled and finished the main quest and like unlocked so many cool like extra like dragon shouts and awesome equipment.
Mhm.
So much to the point that I'm like, well, shoot, I should have done this way sooner because it really wasn't that hard, and I would have had all this stuff for more of my playthroughs. So when
Did you
I
feel
made
like
my
it was
second
kind of like anticlimactic the way you finished the game?
a little bit, so I decided on the second playthrough to do the exact opposite, and that's kind of funny enough. Tying this into games like Pokemon, where I kind of have this
Mm.
similar sort of player perspective of like, let me just get to the end as soon as possible to like open everything else up that I want to do. We could get into Pokemon a little bit maybe later
Yeah.
because it definitely ties into like our open world discussion, even though it's not by any means an open world game.
True.
Yeah, probably more of maybe a sandbox.
Definitely a
Actually, it's maybe
sandbox.
actually more linear, I would say. There's
Yeah,
not
Yeah.
there's not too
linear
much freedom in
sandbox with a lot
Pokemon.
of post game content. But like when I did my second playthrough of Skyrim, I had a lot more enjoyment out of doing the main quest lines by just focusing on them. So I did exclusively the main quest first, got all the way to the end, and I got there with an under-leveled character. I was maybe, I don't know, like level 20, 25 to
Oh,
do like the
jeez.
Alduin fight, and it was
Yeah.
like genuinely extremely difficult. And like when I got to the end of it, and you get all those extra abilities, and you could summon those like crazy Sovngarde champions to fight with you. It's like, wow, this is great. This is so cool. And then used that for all the other subsequent quest lines. Basically, the ones that I didn't do with my first character, I did with my second, because I still that was one thing I didn't like about Skyrim. How you can literally do all the quests with one character build, even though that doesn't totally make sense.
Yeah.
In older Elder Scrolls games, for example, if you, I don't know, for example, like if you do like the Dark Brotherhood,
Mhm.
you like can't do the Thieves Guild because the things that those guild members value conflict with each other. So
Right.
like the Thieves Guild are like, oh well, we'll steal and pillage all we want, but don't kill anybody. So if you join the Dark Brotherhood, that kind of ousts you from the Thieves Guild. In Skyrim, you could just be the guild master of every single guild with one character, and it
Oh yeah, and I
kind of
did
breaks
that.
the immersion. Like in older Elder Scrolls games, they actually would lock off certain factions if you joined certain ones.
Mhm.
So
I
I
actually kind of like that.
yeah, so I always kind of like I just accepted that in the older games, and then when I found out that you could do all of them in Skyrim, I was like, well, that's actually kind of lame. That actually kind of sucks. I want to still kind of lean into the role playing, so I purposefully avoided complete quest lines with my first character, with the intent of doing them with a second one. So that was where my second build came in, of like, let me do the quest lines I didn't do, and take this much like earlier focus main game approach. And for me, that worked much better. It made a much more immersive experience, much cooler character development, and it made me roleplay a lot differently too than I would have if I just built my main guy and like focused on like building up all my stuff and doing all the side quests. Like I didn't do any of that stuff the second time, and it was a way better experience, and it was way less time consuming.
Yeah.
See, the funny part is, I find that interesting too because of the fact that you could tell these games are meant to and designed a certain way to make you enjoy getting lost in the side quests and find all this stuff. But I don't always think the games do a great job of tying everything completely together at the end in a satisfying way because you have that freedom to do that. That's actually where I wanted to talk about like the concept of linear games and a more more tight focused experience versus the open world experience because I find myself with a few exceptions being usually underwhelmed by the end of open world games. it's more about the journey than the actual destination, whereas the linear games are more about the destination than the journey.
Yes, much like Lord of the Rings, it's more about the journey than it is the
Oh,
destination.
get out of here! You're just sour that everybody's
On to-
getting on your case.
On to introduction part 2.
Yeah.
No. I see what you're saying there, Russ, and I can definitely I resonate with what you were saying too, Dan, about the end of Skyrim, and it must have been nice to actually have like a challenging fight at the end of Skyrim, because I was like you, I had
Yeah,
my
you go
main
into
guy.
like level 65 with like
Oh,
a
yeah.
full dragon
Oh my
armor.
God.
Alduin's
Yeah,
just
and
a joke.
it was a joke. I think I actually had to like, bob back and forth and like hang out for a bit just to make the fight last a little longer and feel more epic.
Yeah.
Like I probably could have unequipped my sword and punched the guy to death, because my guy was so strong that even though I didn't build for hand-to-hand skills, I was still able to punch dragons to death. That's how strong he was.
Yeah, the late game in Skyrim just gets so broken. I remember with my first with my Swiftfoot character, that first build, it was all like stealth and magic and stuff. By like the time I finished, like where I kind of felt like, all right, I'm done with this character, I'm ready for a second character. I
Mhm.
was like fully clad in heavy armor with two-handed weapons, like all the stuff that I didn't do originally.
Yeah.
Because all my other stuff was just maxed out, and I was just so stupidly powerful. I remember what did it for me is I found a giant camp, and I ran in
Oh,
there
God.
with my stealth character, and I beasted 3 giants by myself. And I was like, all right, I need to start over because this guy's done. This
Wait,
adventure-
Yeah.
you didn't get punted into the next zip code?
No, I summoned a thunderstorm with a dragon shout. I summoned a bunch of, like I conjured a bunch of guys. I did one of the dragon shouts to let one of the champions come in and help. So they were like distracting them, and I just ran around with like a 2-handed dragon bone greatsword and slaughtered them in like 10 seconds.
Oh,
But
jeez.
because the thing
It was like-
about like Elder Scrolls with that game with Skyrim, like it doesn't scale. So in the beginning of the game, it's challenging, and it's like a normal level of difficulty.
By the end of it, nothing really
Yeah.
can.
Every level up you get makes the game easier and easier.
Well, I mean, it
Mhm.
scales to a point, but yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like, stronger enemies will show up when you hit certain level caps, but aside from that, there's very limited.
Yeah,
There's
so, like-
definitely a limit you face very early on.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
Well,
it's tied. Hold on, Russ. It's tied to your level,
yeah.
and so then you can kind of like cheese it. And there was one time where I did an enchantment bug, with the tied with alchemy. So like I would take potions to increase my skills in like enchantment, and then I would create slightly better enchanted gear, to the point where I had a character that was running around with an iron sword and hide armor, and I was dealing well over 1 million damage per swing of the sword. And
Wait, what?
In true Elder Scrolls fashion, you start talking Elder Scrolls engineering, where you
Oh, gosh.
get an alchemy potion that boosts your intelligence stat, and then use that to make another alchemy potion that boosts your particular skill, and then you
Yeah,
just
it's
enchant
nuts.
this completely exponentially broken armor and weapons, and
Oh,
it's
my
great.
God.
yeah,
It's,
I mean,
it's a lot more feasible to do that in earlier games because there's a lot more fleshed out in the magic system.
mhm.
Mhm.
Right.
And as far as like armor goes in Skyrim and more of Bethesda's more modern open world games and RPGs, there is a level cap, or not level cap, but an armor cap of 85%. So it'll no matter how high your armor rating goes, it'll still only cap at 85% damage reduction. So
Mhm.
there's that, but there's no cap on the total amount of damage you can deal. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, however they balance it and scale it, it's not it's not scaled properly to give you a challenge throughout your whole experience. That's for sure.
certainly not on like the normal difficulty, but if you play on the harder difficulties, it feels a little bit better. I mean, unless you're playing on legendary difficulty right off the bat, it's kind of too easy of a start. But even after a while, legendary difficulty, if you've ever played it, it's after the first 10 hours of grinding and getting your ass kicked, it kind of starts feeling like a walk in the park as well.
And see, that's the thing, is that like, because those games have so many avenues for you to improve your character outside of the main quest, it winds up kind of going off the rails very quickly with you enjoying that nice that Goldilocks zone of just challenging enough that if you don't pay attention, you'll get your butt kicked, and too easy to be entertaining. I think those games, unfortunately, just the side effect of the way they're designed is it basically turns the experience into one where you're just kind of destroying everything once you get past a certain point, and it's more like you get to that point of, okay, I'm ready to be done with this game, rather than I can't wait to finish this game.
Yeah, and kind of piggybacking off of that, the way that these games are designed is the developer doesn't know. Well, I mean, I guess they kind of know what level you're going to be, but at a certain point, there's no way to. Yeah,
It's an educated guess.
There's no way to really truly pin down exactly what level you're going to be at any given point in the game. So there are points in the game where it can just get terribly unbalanced, and that's kind of where you get into that point where you're like, all right, well, I think I've seen enough of this game. I think I might, if I want a challenge, I might want to restart it or just go to a different game.
This is what happened to me with Breath of the Wild eventually. And this is where, I don't know if we want to tip off this discussion now, but this is one of the issues I have with it. Okay,
Not yet.
All right.
Before we get any further, let's start off with a nice little introduction video. Yes, I know, an hour into our podcast, and we're finally hitting our
number 3.
We're hitting our introduction video. So, boys, there is a link to a Watch Together in the Discord chat. Danton, have you ever used Watch Together before?
I have not used Watch Together, but
So,
I see the link.
Yes, Watch Together is this lovely little website. It allows you to play back
Watch together.
Yeah, exactly. So
without having like the lag of it, so basically we can all watch it together. It'll be in time, and each of us can actually pause it or start it back up again.
yeah, so this is something that you might want to consider for your own podcast at home there. So as Russ said, the way that it works is everybody has the ability to pause and rewind at and it'll affect everyone else, and so everyone is in sync. But you have totally full control over your own volume toggle there on the screen. So if it's too loud, you can turn it down, or if it's not loud enough, you can turn it up, and it won't affect me, Russ, and Mark.
Yeah, so Dan, feel free to interject and pause the video if you want to say anything or whatever.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
as you
we're
can.
looking at like a top 10 list, so maybe we should pause it after each one and kind of any points we have to make.
Yep, so ladies and gentlemen, if you check the description, I've cited the video that we're going to be watching, so it will be Game Ranks' 10 things only open world gamers will understand. So it looks like I don't have everyone in the Watch Together. I see Ace, I see Mark,
Danton,
waiting on our old
I guess
pal
I have
Danton.
to click it, don't I?
Yeah,
yes, you do.
Kind of do.
Sitting here staring at it like, oh, this is cool.
All right.
It'll ask you to make a name the first time you use it.
I'll just make it my Discord name. So
Attaboy.
that's consistent.
You don't want to be user NHBRR like me?
No, definitely not.
User number.
Number. Kind of
All right,
cold.
let's get started. Yeah.
All right, one moment, gentlemen. Just flipping over. Don't forget to unmute the site first. There we go.
Help.
All right, we're on the Watch Together. Here we go.
Vast open worlds, freedom, agency, the horizon, and also a lot of bugs and weird stuff. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on GameRank's 10 dumb things that only happen in open world games.
I love it
Starting
already.
off at number 10, it's all the weird bugs. We're just jumping right into this. So open world games are often very big and complex. They have tons of systems
look, it's
going
Solitude.
at the same time, trying to simulate a large-scale world for you. Because of that, they have a tendency to be a little heavier than other games, at least when they're first released. Certain kind of bugs are basically exclusive to open world games even, and they tend to have some of the funniest and weirdest ones out there, and a big reason for that is the nature of the game. Stuff like horses and vehicles falling out of the sky, that's pretty common in open world games, although sometimes they can be difficult to notice, while other things like visually messed up NPCs can stand out a lot more. Honestly, we could dedicate this entire section to the various bugs everybody's seen in Cyberpunk 2077, but it's
Yeah, we
so
could.
far from the only open world game with bugs. Remember the no faces from Assassin's Creed Unity? Or the mutant
jeez.
children from Assassin's Creed Valhalla? Look, at their worst, open world games can be some of the most unstable and buggy games out there.
Hang on, guys. I'm getting feedback from someone.
Maybe me. I'll try turning my volume down.
Okay. All right. Let's hop back into it.
It can be annoying, but if you're lucky, it can also be really funny. At number 9, in some games it's actually
All right, so you want to talk bugs?
Oh boy, yeah. There's some fun ones. I had one happen to me last night where I was up in the northwestern region of Skyrim and trying to take Barbas back to or get whatever axe it is I have to get for some Daedric Prince. Um, and all of a sudden something just yeets me and my horse up in the air, come back down and die instantly. So I'm like, okay. Yeah, so absolutely no idea why that happened, but it was definitely a bug.
Sheogorath.
Yeah, I really don't have much to say about bugs. Despite how many hours I put into Skyrim, especially, that's one of the other notorious games that just has so many bugs in it. You know, Bethesda games where literally, I don't know if you guys knew this, but in the Bethesda headquarters, there's like they actually have like pieces of like tables and chairs like sticking out of walls and stuff because they just embrace how
Just
much
in
they
joke.
yeah,
gosh.
yeah. So,
Joking
but
on this.
like, I must have put between all my different playthroughs over the years, I probably have 300 plus hours into Skyrim, and I really have had minimal experience with bugs. I really, for me, it's all been like really minor stuff, like you turn in a quest item, but then like the quest is still active in your log.
Oh yeah.
You know, stuff like that. In my first playthrough, when I joined the Canyons and became a werewolf, I wanted to get rid of that, so I actually did the quest where you could get cured of lycanthropy. And I would still have like NPC interactions of like, "You smell like a wet dog." It's like, no,
Yeah.
I don't. I'm cured. I'm not a werewolf anymore.
Maybe you just stink though.
Maybe. I mean, I was my Argonian, so
Yeah. Well, I mean,
that was,
like,
my first playthrough where I was just playing it for hours and hours and like not bathing or eating or sleeping. So maybe the game smelled me. I don't know, but like you know what I mean. Like
Yeah.
all my
Yes, the
bugs
famous
were very,
Bethesda
very minor.
smell-o-vision.
Yeah,
I
it's
really
the
didn't have a
true
lot of bug
experience right
experience with
there.
well,
going
and
open world.
certainly speaking as far as, you know, patches and late development and post-release patches go, those will obviously get ironed out over time. But I think what they are kind of like citing as a problem with open world games is when the game is first released and it's just a bug riddled mess. I mean, if you take a look at a game like even the game that I have up here right now on stream, Fallout New Vegas, that is considered to be one of the best Fallout games and also one of the most buggy Fallout games in history because of the short amount of development time that Obsidian was given to develop by Bethesda. And so, yeah, even to this day, I kind of hold my breath at loading screens because you never know, the game could crash. And that's kind of why, like, I don't ever really want to try and do a Let's Play of Fallout New Vegas anymore on my channel because I just don't feel like going through the stress of replaying bits over and over again because the game decided to up and crash, you know?
See, now this is why I like save religiously and often. So
Yeah, you kind of have to.
Well, yeah, or the other way to solve the problem is wait 10 years to play Skyrim, and then you don't have to deal with many bugs. You know, that's a
Very
good way
true.
to
see, I've been working the long game since
the long
college.
game. But yeah, I mean, I also don't have a whole lot to say about bugs. I mean, obviously, it ruins the launch of a game if they're present there. Like, you know, with Cyberpunk, that was a big disappointment. That
Oh,
they
yeah.
were, that there are so many in that game. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the nature of the open world games. They're so huge and so packed with so many details that leaves a lot of opportunities for things to go wrong, and they're not going to be able to catch everything with QA. So, I mean, it's a shame, but I guess it's kind of just like a necessary evil with big open world games like that. You just kind
Yeah,
of gotta hope that
it
they
is
get
kind of
squashed early.
just the nature of the beast, as you said. You know, it's just the worlds are so large, it's too much to account for, and so quality assurance kind of goes by the wayside.
Yeah, I mean, even if they're doing their due diligence, I'm sure they have lots of QA testers that just how massive the games are. There are so many people flooding to play the game on launch day that it doesn't matter how many people you have testing the game, you're gonna have tons and tons of people finding glitches that they've never even seen before on the developer side before the game released, just because you have, you know, such a huge pool of players that, you know, beyond the QA pool going through the game. It's kind of impossible to test everything and make sure everything's squeaky clean before the game comes out. You just have to make sure it's actually playable and not too
Not
bad.
to mention early gamers purposefully trying to break the game, doing
Yeah.
things to like really try to push the game to its limits to kind of discover glitches, for like for speedrun purposes and things like that.
True.
All right. Well, let's move on to number 9. I got it. I'll hit the play button here.
And number 9, in some games it's actually harder not to kill NPCs. Like, we're looking at you, Grand Theft Auto, and you know exactly what we're talking about. Even in games where you're supposed to be a decent guy, like in San Andreas and GTA 4, it's almost impossible to go through the game without getting into a little vehicular manslaughter. It's honestly pretty bad if you think about it. You play as a dude who's totally okay with just driving into a busy sidewalk just because it'll get them through traffic a little quicker. In the real world, that would make you a monster, but the story keeps going on like you're pretty much an okay dude. We all know why that is. These very big...
Oop, sorry. Yep, that's that ludonarrative dissonance that I keep talking about. Bothers me to no end with open world games. All right.
Well, Joe, if you can, just for those listening, can you define that for us?
So, yeah, ludonarrative dissonance is where the events that are happening on screen don't quite match the tone of the story being told. So I go to this as my perfect example of ludonarrative dissonance. Have any of you played Tomb Raider 2013?
Yes, I played the whole reboot trilogy.
Yeah, so Tomb Raider 2013 has a perfect example of ludonarrative dissonance. So pretty early on in the game, Lara Croft gets attacked by a bunch of people on the island that they've crashed on. And
I think I know where
there's
this is going.
there's this one really dramatic scene where she gets her first kill, and it's like one of those really like you feel the struggle because there's like quick time events and you're like wrestling a pistol away from this guy who's trying to kill her, and then she kills him, and it's almost seemingly like an accident. The weapon fires and it hits the guy in the head, and he's dead, he's gone. And she's just struggling with that, that shock of, oh my god, I just killed someone, that was something that I did. And
which is impactful to see in a video game where you're mowing down enemies blindly.
Right, and that's the thing though. Like, that one moment feels bizarre juxtaposed against the rest of the game, where you are literally mowing down enemy after enemy after enemy, and it's not even affecting you whatsoever. There's no gameplay change.
I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily ludonarrative dissonance. I look, I say this with absolutely no experience, but I would imagine those who were, perhaps, in any kind of war situation, they may have felt that way after the first time they killed somebody in war. But, when you wind up having to be in that situation over and over again, you start getting desensitized to it. Now,
no, certainly. But the thing is, though,
probably
Russ,
in the game itself didn't handle that terribly well.
No, it didn't.
After having the big dramatic thing the first time it happens, and then everything else after that is just all hunky dory. Got to clear out these
It would have
people.
been nice if the game had like a sub story where, as you're going through it, she's continually struggling with the idea of killing people and maybe slowly getting more and more numb to that fact.
Yeah.
But
I
think
mean,
what Joe's saying, you're saying like you had that moment, and then after that, it's like any other game where you're just
It's
going
open
through and killing
season.
people.
yeah, they never revisited that theme, and it felt so out of place on an otherwise pretty decent game.
Probably felt more shoehorned for dramatic effect, and then dropped when the moment was over.
Yeah.
One on the topic of this, one funny moment that I had, as far as things just did not match up. I was playing Elder Scrolls Online, and this happens a lot, I imagine, in an MMO. But I try not to pay attention to the stories too much for these quests, because they just get repetitive and boring after a while. But I was doing this one quest, and at the end of the quest, I had to go into this dungeon, and the guy is telling me, "Oh yeah, you need to go in there and fight this ancient evil, and nobody has been into this dungeon in 1,000 years. It's an ancient sacred place where you must go." And
Oh no, and it's full of people.
so I walk up to this guy's talking to me right in front of the dungeon as he's saying this, as the words are leaving his mouth.
50 other players.
Another player walks right out of the door. And I think he starts like hopping around and doing stupid MMO person crap or something. But yeah, it definitely kills the moment when you see something like that.
Yeah, and I mean it kind of also goes along with the meme of, nobody's been in this tomb for hundreds of years, and then you open up a burial urn and you find fresh cheese. Like,
Yep.
That's the Castlevania concept. You punch a wall and get meat.
Yeah.
I love wall meat.
Pull the chicken out of the walls. Yep.
wall
Or,
meat.
or you kill a person in one of those. What was that game you were talking about, Mark? Was it Tekken 3 where you you beat somebody up and then you take their chicken?
Oh yeah, Tekken 3. Yeah, you beat the shit out of them. You take their chicken. It's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well-
Ludonarrative dissonance.
Well,
we're
the
getting
only
over
reason
the
why,
line.
no, like the only reason why, even as a kid, I thought, oh, those things that you pick up are chickens because the dude's like chicken when you pick it up. But actually, I think those are like bags of ice for like numbing the pain, and that's just what they use as
Oh,
the
okay.
health pickups. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that could be it.
Nah, it's definitely chicken.
Yeah, that's definitely that's my headcanon about it.
Maybe it's like chicken that's been turned into ice cubes. I don't know.
No,
Yeah, there
they're
we go.
just rotisserie chickens that have been left on the ground.
Oh boy.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Next
shall we
one, the
go?
video.
Yeah.
Yeah.
let's keep
One. Hold on. Wait. I don't have it up on stream.
Oh well.
All right. Go.
Can I hit the play button?
Yes.
Rookie
It's
mistakes.
pretty bad if you think about it.
There's
You
Jack
play
Black.
as a dude
Hey!
who's totally okay with just driving into a busy sidewalk just because it'll get them through traffic a little quicker.
Well,
And in the real
that
world,
taxi
would
cab
make
just
you
mowed a few folks
monster,
over.
but the story keeps going on like you're pretty much an okay dude. We all know why that is. These open world games have a story they want to tell, and they're not going to change things just because the player wants to go through on a cathartic rampage once in a while. But it can lead to some dissonant moments for sure. GTA is hardly the only one that does this. A lot of open world games let you mow down civilians by the hundreds, even when you're supposed to be the good guy. Some of them give you some kind of penalty, but a lot of them just let it happen. Maybe if they made NPCs have like a little bit of a survival instinct, it wouldn't be so incredibly easy to kill them. But with the way that a lot of games are, they don't do that. The fact that it's harder to avoid killing innocent people in a lot of open world games is just plain dumb. And number 8, in the Grand Theft Auto series, the world is just surrounded by an endless ocean. A weird thing about a lot of open world games is that there's literally nothing outside the bounds of the world that you live in. Even though in games like Grand Theft Auto 5 are supposed to take place in an alternative version of California, it's actually an island in the middle of an empty sea. It's not even close to any other land. There is no hint of a wider world out there. You get on a plane, you just start flying, and you see an infinite sea of nothingness forever. Now, this isn't really the case for a lot of open world games. Red Dead Redemption has the world continue, but it hits you with an invisible wall. But for whatever reason, Grand Theft Auto just makes every city or state into an island. They let you leave the main part of the map, but there's nothing else there. It's honestly kind of creepy when you keep going. It's kind of like breaking the boundaries of the map, but the game just lets you do whatever you want. This one's pretty much confined to the GTA games, but they are also the biggest open world games of all time. There are a few other ones with open ocean all around the game world, like Just Cause, but they're intentionally set on little island nations, so it doesn't really seem quite as strange. Honestly, this is actually kind of a cool thing. It's only dumb when you get to start thinking about it too much. It's kind of cool that the developers give you free roam on the map, even though it doesn't make sense.
Well, and I have actually an example of a game that kind of did those boundaries right, and it's Fallout New Vegas, guys. So
I can't remember the boundaries in that one actually.
yeah, and so actually, with the way that the developer did was they created little like instead of just giving you those invisible walls that say, hey, you can't go past here, you can't go past this point, like in other Bethesda games and other open world games in general. Like there's one example of a Many a True Nerd video that he was doing nothing but praising Fallout New Vegas, and he talked about the way that the environment is naturally geared to have you loop around past these invisible walls, so that way you never see invisible walls, so it just feels like a fully contained an ecosystem.
That's
And
ideal.
yeah, and that's kind of like what you want to hope for and want to strive for with your open world games. But obviously with time constraints, a lot of developers opt to just have those invisible boundaries that break your immersion.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, there's definitely a good and bad way to do it.
Mhm.
I feel like for
Absolutely.
the most part, the map of Hyrule in Breath of the Wild does a pretty decent job with boundaries. 'Cause,
Yeah, I would say
like,
so.
most of the boundaries are just kind of like these inhospitable lands that, like, yeah, if you're just gonna try to keep walking through this desert, you're just gonna die of starvation. So they basically just give you like an invisible wall at the end of these like real extreme landscapes. The only weird one I would say in that case is like the northwestern corner where there's just like a giant like canyon that like there's clearly a mountain range on the other side of the canyon, but you try to like glide over there, you get the invisible wall and the little text bubble says that you can't go any further. That one kind of sucks, but having part of the map cut off by an ocean, so you can only swim out so far because there's really limited swimming controls in that game anyway. So that makes
Mhm.
sense that you really can't go super far. And then the desert part, I thought that was handled relatively well for that particular map.
I agree. Yeah, that definitely made the most sense because there's certain quests where you wind up even getting back, or certain treasure hunts. I think we wind up getting like all the way back to that back corner of the desert, and that would make sense. That like, okay, you're out into essentially a vast desert where you're not going to survive. It makes sense. Um, I kind of wish some of the games would take the approach of like the endless staircase from Super Mario 64, where yeah, you could keep like going, but you're
But there's
really
really
not
nothing
getting
of
any
interest,
further.
and it's not worth
Yeah,
it.
it basically just repeats it, and you turn back and you're like, oh, civilization's still back there. Now that would be a little bit jarring to
It
see,
should
but at
also
least it
play
wouldn't be
that
like,
music. It should play the music when you get to the
oh my
boundary of
god,
the world.
whatever. But no, I mean, it would be nice to see it. It'd be a little jarring to turn around and see you're the same distance away that you were before. But at the same time, at least it would make a little bit more sense because eventually you get to the point where you're like, oh, I'm not going anywhere. So I'll just turn back instead of like hitting a wall and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially the invisible wall. I feel like that's just such a cheap cop out.
Well, that too. I mean, even some places handle it like in the Blood Gulch manner from Halo, where it's like you don't want people getting outside the map. Everything around it is an unscalable mountain.
Yeah, that's one way to do it. Just make it all take place in a big valley.
Yeah, exactly.
Or an island in the case of GTA.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
All right.
whatever. Next point.
Let's check the next one.
You're allowed to press play.
Oh, I thought we were waiting for you to get this ready to go again.
Yeah, that's why I said you're allowed to press play.
And number
Wonderful.
7 is the klepto hero. Yeah, pretty much just
Oh, hey, Russ.
thing in
This is
any
Russ.
game where you
Oh,
collect
yeah,
items,
there we go.
But it's especially bad in open world games.
Yeah.
We all
Wait.
do it too, and it never
Yep.
makes any sense. You just
Yep.
walk
Oh,
into
yeah, you
anybody's
just
house,
probably
steal
pilfered the
everything
stone
that's
of
not
Baron
nailed
Zaya
down,
last
and
night.
then
Yep.
happily agree with them
I have
with
2 of them,
whatever
but they're still
quest they wanna
unusual.
give you. It's just
Oh, they
there's
made
no
me the Jack
mention
Nicholson
at
meme.
all is made of the blatant thievery. They just give you your task, and that's that. Or in some cases, they're just some person, and they're like, "Hi, how are you today?" And you're like, "I just stole your stuff." Haha. It's really noticeable in games like Witcher 3.
Oh, yeah.
Where you can take like a ton of stuff from people's houses without it being considered stealing at all. It's mostly junk, but who knows? You might need it or be able to sell it. It's especially funny in games like Skyrim where those
And it's funny, if you take a look at the footage that I recorded for the stream, that's what I basically do at the beginning of Fallout New Vegas every time, as you just raid the shit out of Doc Mitchell's house and sell him his own stuff that you stole from him. Yeah.
Like, hey, this precious family heirloom that you have? Yeah. Well, I have one exactly like it. I'd like to sell you. I mean, no, this is a good point he's making, and I think a large part of it is that, you could make it so that it would be, stealing to take that kind of stuff, but I prefer the concept that some certain games handle where, like, like over time, whatever's stolen is eventually forgotten about, and eventually is no longer looked upon as stolen, or you could just pay to basically fence it like ESO does typically. And I haven't gotten far enough in Skyrim to find if you could do that yet, but I'm guessing you might be able to.
Well, me stroking Fallout New Vegas again. So the way that the game works is it's got a system of factions, and each items or factions items are tied to that faction. There's like a small marker on there, like behind the scenes, saying, "Oh, you took that from the NCR. You took that from Caesar's Legion." When you go to merchants that are aligned to that faction that you stole from, those items just won't be made available to be sold back to that faction. But if you go to a different faction, say you steal from Caesar's Legion, and you go to, say, I don't know,
The NCR.
Yeah, the NCR. NCR will buy that as if it's not stolen.
Okay, that's pretty cool. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
And it
Good way to do it.
Yeah, and the way that Skyrim did it was to sell stolen goods, you had to go to a fence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or I think you could invest in certain merchants and they would buy it, right?
I think it might be a perk, but I'm not certain because it's been a
It is
while
a
since I
perk,
played.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, if it's a perk that involves selling stolen goods, Russ knows about it.
That is very true. I told you, my guy's a good guy, but he needs money to fuel his good activities.
He's a paladin with his pockets turned out.
I'm a basically an capitalist. Whenever I play as one of my characters in an RPG, I'm like,
Our
I need your
items.
money to save you. Anywho,
Next one.
Hang on, 1 sec.
I think he's still talking about number 7 here.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
Here we go.
no, he's setting up for the stream.
No, you're good.
All right, hit it.
Open nature of the game just lets you pull off all these really silly tricks, like the old pot on head trick. You just
Oh, yeah.
block an NPC's view.
Oh, I
and
saw
you
that
just
in Game
take
of
whatever
Thrones.
You want, no problem. You'd think if you tried this in real life, the person would, I don't know, take the pot off their head, but they'll just stand there forever with a thing on their head while you happily rob them blind. It's not exactly the most heroic thing to do, but the game doesn't stop you, and no one seems to care, so hey, why not? At number 6, you clear out a base only for it to fill right back up again. You see this in Assassin's Creed games, some Far Cry games. The worst is in 2. Okay, it's less dumb in a funny way and more dumb in an annoying way. You spend time slowly and carefully clearing out an enemy base, then you leave and come back, maybe to collect something you might have missed, only to find that the place is completely repopulated, like immediately. The most infamous example of this has to be Far Cry 2, which dotted the map with checkpoints that you were basically forced to pass multiple times if you wanted to get anywhere at all, and these checkpoints would constantly be getting fresh new soldiers to give you problems. It's like, I cleared this place out already, where did these guys come from? It's especially annoying when this happens in what feels like no time at all. Like, these bases would get refilled fast sometimes, and in a way that made it very annoying to deal with. Far Cry 2 is hardly the only game that does this, though. Assassin's Creed, Ghost Recon Breakpoint, Watch Dogs Legion, basically any Ubisoft game does it, even if it's not quite as annoying to deal with. In general, though, it just kind of sucks to know that carefully dismantling an enemy base is basically pointless because they'll just have it again in an hour. Not every open world game does this, and it's not always bad when they do, but it can be disappointing. And number 5 is
Actually, you know what? I can sum that up. The fix to that in one example. Breath of the Wild's Blood Moon solves
Read my
that.
mind. I
Yep,
was
that
just
is.
gonna say, once again, to stroke Breath of the Wild, like having the entire world. Once you could rid a dozen monster camps and you could revisit them several hours later, they will still be drained until that blood moon hits, and then the entire world resets, and you know it because they make a deal of it every time it happens, and it happens in long enough increments or intervals that it doesn't become a problem.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it actually,
It's just like a few hours of real time until that happens.
yeah, several. I think it's like 5 or 6 at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a sizable chunk of time before.
They also use it as a good way to replace lower level enemies with higher level versions of them, essentially.
Yeah, on average, you may see 1 per play session, unless you're doing like several hours. If you're doing like a 12 or 15-hour session, you might see 2.
Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
actually not entirely sure how the game's mechanics work, but there's a way you can kind of like trigger blood moons to happen more frequently, I think,
Mm-hmm.
or something. But yeah, no, it definitely fixes that problem tremendously. And you can, like I said, as long as it's within the realm of a blood moon, you could revisit a camp that you cleared out eons ago, and it'll still be cleared out, which is awesome.
Yeah, because
that's-
Oh, go ahead, Mark.
I was just gonna say that's one thing that I think an open world game kind of struggles with. I think they feel the need to give something to the player that they can always reliably do, and that's why if you clear out a camp in the game that he mentioned, it just gets repopulated right away. And I think that's also why a lot of open world games will give you quests that can just be repeated over and over again. You were saying those Radiant quests, so maybe like now is a good time to to open.
Find out if another settlement needs your help.
That conversation should happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk Radiant Quest now. That's fine.
Have you screened this video? Does he talk about that later?
No, I mean, I think I've seen. Actually, no, I haven't screened this. I saw
Well,
it. I watched
let's
maybe
finish watching this.
yeah.
then,
So
and
let's
then we'll-
Okay.
yeah, let's finish it and then
We can get into Radiant Quests after the video.
yeah.
Oh yeah,
Works for me.
same.
All right, hit that play button.
5 is hunting down pointless collectibles. Yeah, so open world game heroes don't care about killing innocent people. They'll rob people they're trying to help blind, and they've got the attention span of a hummingbird. With the sometimes hundreds of collectibles to be found in an open world game, it's easy to imagine your character as someone who is distracted by pretty much.
Yeah, I want to stop here because this is one of my important points, I would say, about open world games overall. And just it ties into the whole idea of always giving the player something to do, but also this idea of just cramming things into your game, no matter what, just to provide content and get the player spending more time, and giving them the opportunity to spend dozens and dozens of hours in your open world that you've created, even if the content that you've put in there isn't very engaging. I mean, look at that. Look at where I just paused right there. Look at that screenshot with the map. Now,
Yeah.
like, I've never played. I guess this is
Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Yep.
Yeah. mhm.
Yeah, I haven't played this, but I mean, I've seen this type of map many
The
times
Witcher.
before
Witcher 3.
in games, and I actually have a term that I've coined for this type of game, and I call them checkbox games, because they're not so much giving you interesting things to do and really engaging quests or missions to go on. They're just giving you things to do that makes you go from point A to point B on a map. I mean, I don't know what those exclamation points signify. Maybe they're simple fetch quests. I see so many different icons on this map. I'm sure some of them are just collectibles, like he's talking about right now, and just a whole lot of stuff that you can do and will add dozens of hours to the experience. But
None of it feels significant.
yeah,
Yeah.
when you get done, you just don't feel like you've accomplished much or had a whole lot of fun.
Well, I mean, a game that I think of that kind of did something similar to that, but added a little bit of a little bit more to the gameplay and actually changed your character a bit was Shadow of Mordor, where
Okay.
there were collectibles.
As you could have guessed, I haven't played this one.
Yeah, so Shadow of Mordor, the collectibles added on a little bit of extra lore. I'm assuming a lot of these more modern open world games are doing this. It was similar to like the extra lore that you would get in Tomb Raider when you would pick up a collectible and you would rotate it and find like a memory point, and then it would give you a little bit of the lore to that item that you picked up. Or there was elven points of where you'd pick up like elven runes, and it would kind of like fill out a mosaic for you to complete. And then there was weapon side quests where like you would complete the side quest and it would change your weapons to the point where they would physically change, and you could add more runes to it, and that's how you would kind of progress your character.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but for me, like the whole idea of checkbox games, it's definitely a downside to open world games. So I wanted to emphasize.
Yeah,
that.
there's too many points of interest. There's too many things to do.
Yeah,
It
because
feels overwhelming.
Right.
Yeah.
I call it that way because you're not playing the game to have fun. You're playing it to check that box. You're saying, okay, well, all right, I want to climb all these towers in Assassin's Creed so I can fill out my map. Okay, I've climbed all the towers. Now I want to go do all these side assassination missions. Okay, now I want to go find the pigeons or whatever the hell that they're making you do in the game.
It doesn't flow organically.
Yeah, that too. But also, it's like you're just checking a box. You're not playing the game to have fun. You're playing it so that you can wipe markers off of a map. And
Yeah.
the main downside of that is it's really tough to know what's actually worth doing, because sometimes these games will have worthwhile side adventures. Like, for example, the Tomb Raider reboots, they have all those extra tombs. There are these whole tombs that they've put into the game that give you some nice puzzles to go through. It reminds you of classic Tomb Raider. And, you know, with all the other stuff that they have going on in some of these games, you might not know that that's worth doing. You might just ignore that and stick to the main story because you're not even sure what's worth doing anymore. And one of the biggest letdowns for that can be there for open world games for me personally is when there are great elements in a game, but they're just diluted by the open world and subpar features that make the game less engaging.
Yeah.
Agreed. No, you're exactly right. I felt like this was a thing that happened a lot in The Witcher 3. As much as I absolutely love that game, I look at the map and it's like they just threw a bunch of icons everywhere on the map. I find myself trying to say okay, I want to clear out this area so I'm done with it. But I should never feel like, okay, I need to clear out this area so I don't have to worry about it, instead of I want to play the game and go have fun on a side quest or a main quest.
Exactly. I mean,
Yeah,
luckily,
I want to explore every nook and cranny and see what this part of the map has to offer me.
yeah, luckily Witcher 3 is a phenomenal game and one of the best RPGs to come out this century, honestly. So when I was going through and doing all the extra stuff there, I was still having fun because it's a very enjoyable game. But not every game comes even close to that kind of quality of the experience, and it's more noticeable in those games.
It's like it's meant for basically completionists, or it's meant to keep them busy.
Just tedium for completionists. Unless I think in some rare cases, the reward is worth it. Do all of a particular kind of quest all over the map and get some real crazy cool weapon or ability or something like that. But even then, I feel like those rewards aren't really worth all the excessive hours of tedium you go through to do the same thing as many times as these games are asking you to do them. You know what I mean?
Right.
Well, see, the issue there is that whatever reward they could give you, whether it be a new weapon, a new piece of armor, chances are it's not powerful enough to make it worth the while, because if it was, it would be absolutely broken by comparison to anything else if you didn't do the quest. So it just winds up feeling like another thing you stash in your inventory.
Fallout New
and
Vegas did that
maybe
really well.
use. Yeah.
Yeah, they did that really well with their unique weapons. They would take say your typical laser rifle, but the unique variant of it would be a little bit more powerful, but then there would be the drawback of it not firing quite as quickly, or it would have lower capacity. So, I mean, or my favorite one, the Gauss rifle, where it would use more ammunition per shot, but it was more powerful.
Right.
So they kind of played with the the way that the weapon worked to kind of add that extra balance.
I think that Fallout and Elder Scrolls are great examples of doing side content in an open world the right way, because I made 2 total characters in Skyrim, and I haven't touched it in a long time, since it was since its
relevant.
first year, really. Yeah. But I made 2 characters, and between the 2 of them, I spent about 250 hours. And I did a lot of the side material, but I know I didn't do all of it. And there's not some check mark hovering over a city to tell me that I haven't done something yet. You discover things organically, and big part of the job for both the Fallout and the Elder Scrolls games is just exploring, and you're on your way to one quest, and then you get sidetracked.
Carving your own story.
Yeah, because you found a dungeon or something, and there really aren't an excessive amount of side quests in those games, but they all feel more meaningful when you do find them. They're usually not simple fetch quests. There's usually a bit more to them.
Yeah, and even the most mundane fetch quests of the set usually have some semblance of at least a minimally engaging story. This girl was kidnapped by bandits, you gotta go find the camp and save her, or something like that. Where you always get at least the kind of cool little memorable experience that you can tell your friends about the next day. I did this cool little thing outside of Whiterun last night,
Yeah, and you find these events organically. Maybe you find a quest because there's a group of bandits attacking someone, and that's how the quest starts. Or you talk to someone in town. There's nothing forcing you to do these things. There's nothing being shoved in your face. Hey, go do this. You need to go
Yeah.
experience that, or else you
It's
have
Setting up your map by doing this, going here, talking to them.
Yeah, it's not forced on you through your. It's just being there, prescribed to you on your map for you to go do it. Like you said, it happens organically. Even if, like, I know we'll talk about it in a little bit, but with the Radiant quest, at least someone gives you that quest. It's not just handed to you and say, "Hey, go to this point, look at this thing, and check it off your box." Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it adds to that wonder. It adds to that enjoyment that you play open world games for. You want to be immersed in a world. You don't want to feel like it's a grocery list of objectives that you have to do, and you have an idea of everything that can be done in the game right away, and you can just start checking the boxes, going down the list, and clearing icons off a map. It's organic. You experience these things naturally, and it leads into new adventures. That's how it should be done.
You don't find a sense of adventure in like washing the dishes and taking out the trash and cleaning the bathroom and all that stuff?
Only if you're washing out dishes that have been in the back of your fridge for about 6 months. So, because then you get to enjoy a science experiment.
Once again, to gush on Breath of the Wild, it's something I'm going to do a lot while we do this whole open world talk. But
Good foreshadowing.
This might be a bit controversial, but I think this is another example of like side content done really, really well. The Korok seeds are notorious. Everyone's, oh my god, there's 900 of them, and there's so many, and they're all over the map, and like that's the whole point. You don't need to get all 900 of them. You only like the reward for getting the Korok seeds is you more deeply explore parts of the map. There's no map markers or clues to them even being there. You just have to be observant and notice like, oh yeah, there's those 3 trees that make some kind of pattern. Maybe I should kind of find a way to interact with or manipulate that pattern, and then poof, a Korok shows up, and you collect a little seed, and you get a bunch of them, and you find some dude at some point in the game that you give him enough seeds, and you get inventory upgrades. So you get a direct reward that ties into the core combat mechanic of the game, with the durability system. It's like, all right, well, this is a really cool reward because it allows me to carry more weapons and more shields and more bows, which makes fighting easier. So you want to find as many of these guys as you can, and I remember on my first playthrough, I was just looking it up and looking into it. I think you only need to get pretty much exactly half of the Koroks to get all of the available inventory upgrades that are available in the game. I think you have to get like 455, if I'm remembering the right number. So like the devs purposefully put in way many more than you need to actually collect. So that way, even several dozens of hours into your playthrough, you're still going to be finding these guys regularly enough that getting another 50 or 60 seeds to get another bow slot is worth it, even late game. At least I've found.
No, that was one thing Breath of the Wild did very well by comparison to other open world games, is that, if I remember correctly, there was no carry weight to have to worry about. The only thing you had was a restricted number of inventory slots for weapons, or for shields, or for bows,
and for food. You can only have so many pages of meals. But as far as like inventory collectibles, it's infinite pretty much.
And that was the thing I really liked about it, was the fact that, like, yes, your inventory was restricted in some sense, but it wasn't like the standard, this weapon weighs this much and you can only carry this much. I'm like, great. This creates the one thing I hate the most about it, was like,
so I could carry 15 more acorns to get an armor upgrade. Like, none of that crap.
Exactly. That part I really enjoy. And Nintendo games tend to kind of have that suspension of belief when it comes time for that kind of stuff. Like any modern like, for example, I'm gonna go back to Pokemon again. The first Red and Blue, okay, you could store 20 items in your bag and 50 items in the PC. This included everything: TMs, potions, Pokeballs, key items, you name it. It counted towards that. It was annoying because there were definitely not as many spaces.
Throw stuff out, or sell things, or dump stuff in the PC,
or not even pick it up in the first place.
Oh yeah, or just leave items on the ground.
Well, it's also important to note that items were stackable too.
Well,
I know it's a very minor point, but one could be confused
even that
with the
becomes
way that
a
you're
bit of an
describing
issue
it.
as well, especially because there's already 50 TMs in the game as there is, and 50 spots to store things in your PC. It makes it kind of difficult. Now, the more modern games have basically said, forget it, there's no inventory limits, and we're just going to give you unlimited space in the bag.
Bottomless bag, you could store.
You basically had the Legend of Zelda bag, where it's anything and everything. Yeah, exactly. and you know what? It took a part of the game that I'm sure the developers thought initially was a good idea, so you couldn't just steamroll your way through the game, and basically took a problem and turned it into a quality of life upgrade that basically is a given at this point.
So what you're saying is you don't like running around with Hermione's purse?
With what?
Hermione's purse?
I don't know if he's gonna get that reference.
I'm probably won't get that reference.
Yeah,
Hermione-
it's from Harry Potter.
Hermione has a magical-
I mean, I know who Hermione is, but
Hermione enchants this bag because like they basically spend the first half of the book on the run from all
Okay.
like, the evil guys. So she like enchants this bag that like becomes like bottomless, and they can store like all their stuff in it, extra clothes and food, and like a tent that they can camp out in. It's quite clever actually, but it's basically
the
what
same-
you have in any standard Pokemon playthrough. You have Hermione's bag. It's
and that's the
great.
thing is that like I find that to be a thing that I wish. You know, I know some games do it for the sense of, you know, realism of like, well, your character can only carry so much. I'm like, it's just, it feels like an imposed limit that really doesn't bring anything else special to the gameplay to me personally.
I feel like so much of this complaint is rooted in your most recent 40+ hours of
No,
Skyrim.
it's not even Skyrim. Actually, probably the one that got me the most with this was Kingdom Come Deliverance and The Witcher to some extent. But at least in The Witcher, like, you could hop on your horse and still ride around, and there was no weight limit to what you could carry. Eventually, in Kingdom Come Deliverance, even how much you have that you carry with you, you eventually can't even ride your horse after a while. And I'm like,
Wasn't it also like if you carried too much, you couldn't move at all either?
yeah, you couldn't move at all, or you'd move at such a slow pace that, like, I'm pretty sure I walked straight across all of Bohemia, like, at, like, a snail's pace over 3 days' time, because I didn't want to drop all this, like, crazy expensive armor
Well,
and
so I
swords
want-
that I...
I want to
Go
see
ahead.
you make a top 10 YouTube video. Russ's top 10 games to be over encumbered in.
I mean, it's
Yes,
true. I
no.
mean, and no, you're right. And the thing is that those type of games allow for that play style of take everything you see that, you know, has any kind of decent value and sell it off so you can afford things. I hate the idea of, you know, playing a game like that, and probably because my first experience with the genre really did come from The Legend of Zelda, where that basically is a meaningless thing. It doesn't matter. Like
Yeah, the
after
only
having
limit you
played
have is how many arrows you could stuff in your quiver.
exactly, that is literally the limit of it. There's no like, you know, oh, the arrows, you know, weigh this much, so you can only carry so many at a time. It was you have a set limit of how many you can carry. And after having played those type of games as my first, you know, foray into RPG action adventure type of situations, I find it to be more of a burden than a realistic limitation. But that's just the way I feel about it.
Yeah,
Mm.
you could definitely argue the opposite, that like, oh, it's kind of a good sort of idea of game design of like putting that kind of limit, especially early game of like, yeah, you can't just carry like 15 different swords and that kind of thing. Like I get what they're going for. I've actually, you guys probably know this. I just recently started like a legit playthrough of World of Warcraft.
Mm-hmm.
You know, our buddy Enrico is like hosting like a server with another circle of friends, and like he has like a cool like custom thing that he could host us, and we could all play on one of the expansions from the early game back in like I want to say like 2003 or whatever is the
Oh,
game we're
nice.
playing now. It's like really old school. And the way that game handled inventory is like your bag. You start off with an adventure pouch that could hold it's like 16 different slots, and the
Mhm.
slots could be filled. So if you had like a repeat collectible, like a certain animal part that you had to do, those would all get put into the same little compartment of the bag.
Mhm.
You know, the same little slot.
Yeah.
So like one slot could be a weapon, one slot could be a piece of clothing, and like that sort of thing. So like there's that limit, but you can get additional adventure pouches that you can attach. You could get up to like 5, and they
Okay.
vary in size. You could get some that give you like an extra 4 or an extra 8, or entire bags that give you an extra 16. And like so much of what makes when I play it so engaging is like constantly managing the inventory of like, well, what things should I pick up? Because like certain spoils sell for much more, and certain ones are like, well, I don't really need to collect these anymore because they're really not worth it, and they're just going to take up space in my bag.
Right.
You know, so I find that part of it actually to be really engaging and fun, especially because it just caters to like the OCD person in me of like putting all the animal parts in one compartment of the bag and putting all the weapon stuff in a different bag, and then going back to the shop after an adventure and doing a quest line, and then selling all the stuff to empty the bag out to make room for the next romp.
Right.
I
And
find
that's the thing is,
inventory management part to be a lot of fun.
no, I definitely enjoy like the go out, go questing, pick up a whole bunch of items from the people you wind up taking down and go sell them off type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But again, I'm just not a big fan of encumbrance. But Mark, you're right. I probably could make a top 10 or top 5 games to play encumbered. Oh my god.
Uh, Yeah, inventory systems can be, they can add to a game, they can take away from it depending on how it's implemented.
Yeah,
It's
there's
usually
definitely a
not
lot
an
of
issue.
clarity of how well they can be done.
Yeah, it's usually not an issue for me. I mean, but then sometimes games can make a mechanic of it, like Fallout being more of a survival game. It makes sense that that you get encumbered very easily, and you can only hold so much. You really have to pick and choose what you carry, right, Joe?
Yes, but specifically in the survival game difficulty in Fallout 4, like your carrying capacity is severely limited in comparison to the main game. Yeah.
Yeah, but even playing on normal, I would say that a game like the Fallout games typically let you carry less than other RPGs.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to do like a direct comparison between Fallout 4 and then Skyrim, I think Skyrim gives you a base carry weight of 300. Doesn't matter.
It does. Yeah, it levels up 5 every level up.
Yeah, and that increases with every stamina point that you dump into your character. But with Fallout, I think the base, if I recall correctly, is like somewhere around 250 on normal difficulty, and it's tied. It's a function of your strength, special stat, and whereas like say if I'm playing it on survival mode, and I have a character with only 3 strength, you can only carry 90 pounds worth of items. So it really makes you consider how you manage that inventory. Do you want to go running around with that super powerful sniper rifle, even though you don't have a lot of ammo for it, and it's going to take up a little bit more inventory space than your pistol that, is really weak, but you got a lot of ammo for it? So yeah, it really forces you to manage those inventory, your carry capacity, how much, healing items you bring along, what type of armor you wear, all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a weird thing to say, but I think my favorite inventory system of all time would have to be Resident Evil 4.
Oh, yeah, for certain. Yeah.
What are you buying?
Oh yeah, it just feels so good when you just like line everything up in your box just perfectly.
And everything is, it's incredibly satisfying. Another inventory system that I really like, even though I kind of like low-key kind of hate this game now because of just my experiences with it, just because I'm not good at it, is Rust. So it was, it's, I think it's it was originally like a mod to Arma 2, so like it has a similar inventory system as PUBG, because they're basically the same like skeleton of a game, where you have a fixed number of inventory slots, and certain stackable items are stackable, and you can carry up to a certain amount of the stackable item depending on what it is. So it's basically like the Minecraft model of an inventory system where items are stackable and you can carry a certain number of total items.
Yeah,
if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
all right. Let's go back to it.
Everything. Remember how one of the collectibles in Assassin's Creed 2 were feathers? Like Ezio's
Oh,
just gonna
yeah.
stop all of his very important, time-consuming, huge quest for revenge against the Templars to chase some feathers around. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Cool. Fine. Normal, even. It's just really goofy when you think about it. Imagining Batman actually taking the time to collect Riddler trophies. Sure, there is an actual reason for him to get them in-game. They help him catch the Riddler in a lot of instances, but it's still just pretty funny imagining Batman flailing around trying to solve a physics puzzle or whatever in an open world. Like in the middle of a hostage situation. There are other games with equally pointless stuff. Remember the Playboy magazines in Mafia 2? Or, hell, the hundreds and hundreds of Korok seeds in Breath of the Wild? Yeah, that whole Ganon thing.
Bingo.
That destroyed Hyrule that one time. It might be coming back, but no. We need to go around and find 900 Korok seeds for, what amounts to basically a pointless reward. In any real-world sense, collecting these things just totally nonsense. It can be fun and relaxing to do if you're into it, but it really just doesn't make sense. And number 4, escaping wanted levels. You know what we're talking about here. You wanted at level 5, the police have pulled out all the stops to get you, they shoot on sight, helicopters, armed cars, government pulls up in tanks, man. No holds barred. These people want your end. Then you get out of the red circle and hide for a few seconds and everybody just gives up. They all go home and eat dinner, I guess. Doesn't matter how terrible your crimes were, as long as you're outside that circle and wait a while, you get off totally scot-free. Hell, even if you do get caught or killed, they still just basically let you go with a little swat on the wrist. Pay some hospital fees, have your weapons confiscated, and you're good to go. It's not just GTA games that do this sort of thing either. It's basically every kind of open world game with like a wanted system in it. Like Red Faction Guerrilla, if you drive into the rebel base and EDF loses track of you, that's it. Like you'd think bringing the bad guys directly to your secret base would be a bad thing, but no, you just drive up this hill and they're like, well, he went up in the hills, so I guess we have to stop. I don't want to go up in the hills. The thing is, though, that if these manhunts were more realistic, it would basically sap all the fun out of the game. It's fun to go on a rampage once in a while in GTA, but you don't want to ruin your game forever by making it so the police are going to try to kill you on sight while you're driving around for the rest of all time.
I don't know. I kind of disagree with that.
I totally
To a certain
agree with
extent.
Joe on this. It would be totally cool. Like if you got to a certain wanted level, they would just be in so much like where civilians could like call you out and like try to report you to the police, and you got to constantly be on the run, and that would totally change how you play the game.
Yeah,
That's
like
true.
permanent consequences need to be more of a thing in these games.
Yeah, I feel like especially in more recent years, a lot of like open world RPG games have kind of dialed that whole like major consequence for like doing whatever down. Like going back to the Elder Scrolls, like for example, like I think they mainly fixed it in Oblivion, where like if you end up either through doing it yourself or through just not protecting, like if you get like a main character killed, they just kind of fall unconscious for a few minutes and then they get back up and then they're fine. But going back to Morrowind, if you like there's actually, you could actually kill like main characters or have them get killed, and then that like affects your playthrough for the rest of the game. Or like if that person dies, you can't complete certain quests, you can't progress in certain parts of the story, so it really makes you think before you just like run into a village and like just kill everybody. Like, oh, you actually don't want those people to die because they matter.
Yeah,
I
and
think for some reason part of that is, game developers wanting to make sure that the experience isn't like kind of ruined on a first playthrough by some of some gamers' worst tendencies, because for some people it's GTA. They're gonna mow down everybody they find or mow down whoever
like you
happens to
said,
get in their way.
I would kind of ruin the game for you if you went on a rampage and got hunted for the rest of the game because of that.
but even still, like I think adding in those consequences will like first of all, it would be like an organic consequence to your actions in game, and the game would need to be tailored slightly differently to make those consequences more permanent. Like, obviously, you can't take Grand Theft Auto as it is right now and add those types of consequences and expect the game to function properly. Because after a while, after a while, I guess it would get annoying that you accidentally ran someone over back at the beginning of the game and you're still playing in the end game and the cops are still trying to chase after you. Obviously, I get that, but like,
there's an extreme.
Yeah, but like again, going back to Fallout New Vegas, there was a point in the game where like it would give you like a fresh reset based on like your reputation with certain factions, and like doing quests or just killing characters that were tied to a specific faction would either raise or lower your reputation with them. And after a certain point, the game's like, okay, so now here's all of your sins forgiven, but anything after this will never be forgiven. And I think that's kind of like a nice middle ground for that, where you still have those consequences based on your actions, but you kind of get your opportunity to figure things out for yourself.
I'd like to point out the game that handled this the best out of any game I've ever seen. Fantastic way of doing it. I speak, of course, of Link's Awakening, where once you steal something from a shop, everybody calls you thief for the rest of the game.
Oh, really?
Yep.
I
But
actually did not know that.
that's the only consequence. That's it. They just call you thief for the rest of the game. You know that, like, you went in there, you stole that, 900 rupee bow and arrow while that guy wasn't looking, and then you made the mistake of walking back into the shop, and you got Palpatined into oblivion. So, I'm kidding, of course. Like, it's tough because with a game like, any of these kind of games, you don't want to absolutely just obliterate a person's game through because they decided to, they either indulge their worst, instincts with it, especially for a game like GTA, or wound up accidentally running somebody over when the car controls kind of janky, like certain things in Cyberpunk. So I think that's part of the reason why the consequences don't seem quite commensurate with your actions itself, and why they tend to forgive stuff like that. Because if they were like, you ran over 5 people, you've been found guilty of vehicular manslaughter, we're putting you away for life, game over.
Yeah.
Roll
if they
credits.
if they did that, you can. I mean, could you imagine the
You'd have to
outrage?
overhaul the crime system and have you'd have to do more egregious offenses to be wanted.
Well, see, that's the thing. You can never have it terribly realistic, because if you did, you'd have people, all up in arms about, oh, well, I accidentally ran somebody over in GTA and they threw the book at me and put me away for life.
Right. I like I said, I think it would need to be structured and built into the system where it would make sense and it would be fair. Right. Like, obviously, it would be a really shitty experience if at the beginning of the game you accidentally ran someone over, played perfectly the rest of the game, and then the game was like, oh, hey, by the way, you're under arrest. Game over, boy. Like, there should be some, narrative consequences to decisions like that. Where,
Absolutely.
Maybe like a morale, kind of like a gradient of morality, where I don't know, the repercussions get more and more severe as you become a worse person.
yeah, and
Yeah.
your character, the way they...
That to an extent in Red
Yeah.
Dead Redemption, didn't they? Didn't they have a fame and infamy system, a reputation of your character?
They
based on
did, but it was more so about how the towns would react to you as you walked into town, pretty much. And
okay.
yeah, no, I'm thinking, since it's recently been on my mind because I wanted to talk about it for this podcast, was Metal Gear Solid 5, where the game would change slightly based on your play style. Like, if you shot people in the head with tranquilizer darts, they would start wearing helmets, or if you used smoke grenades, they would start wearing gas masks to protect themselves. But there was also something
adapt like that, actually.
yeah, and one thing that I didn't know would happen was and I learned this just kind of by looking into the game and watching some reviews of it, was that if you are malicious and you light people on fire and you massacre them, after a certain point, Snake is permanently covered in blood. And I think that's a really interesting consequence for those actions. I mean, because sometimes when you're playing, you get covered in blood, you go in the shower, you clean off, and you're perfectly fine again. But when you play that viciously and that with reckless abandon and no care of the consequences of the actions that you're taking, there's a physical change in the consequence. It's purely cosmetic, but it's stuck for the rest of the game now, as far as I'm aware.
You got Lady Macbeth. You couldn't wash the blood from your hands.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's something that the Metal Gear Solid games have always been good about, in kind of discouraging killing. You can play those games without killing. You can take people out non-lethally. Another good example is Metal Gear Solid 3, when you're fighting the Sorrow.
Yes.
Yeah, because in that one, you're basically the whole fight. You're walking down in this waist deep canal, and
Yep.
you're walking straight forward while this boss is hovering in the air in front of you, and you're having this conversation with him. And as you're walking down that canal, depending on how many enemies you killed in the game, that's how many enemies attack you in the canal as you're going through it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you didn't kill anybody, it'll be a quick trip. But if you killed a lot of people, then all of their kind of ghosts will be haunting you throughout the fight.
Yeah, and actually the Sorrow's level of aggression changes based on how many people you killed as well. He attacks more often and more aggressively when you've killed more enemies, which is a nice little touch and consequence. It kind of
really cool mechanics.
Yeah, it on subsequent playthroughs of Snake Eater, it's really made me consider, do I want to? Because my very first playthrough, I just went through that with reckless abandon and killed people when I needed to.
I think I did the same thing.
Yeah, and so then when I got to that part, I was like, oh my god, this really gives you pause to see exactly how many characters and enemies you killed, because a lot of these games, it's like a spreadsheet at the end of the game. It's amount of enemies you killed. Resident Evil 4 and 5 and 6 are notorious for that, where you finish a chapter and it's just by the way, this is how many enemies you killed. It's all right, cool, that's a number. But like with that game, it was like a clear consequence where you had to walk past every single person that you killed. And I like consequences like that. It
You know, the Metal Gear series always had kind of an anti-war bend to begin with, you know?
Yeah.
So that's understandable.
Kojima's the best.
All right, ready to get back to this?
Yeah.
All right,
point.
hit play.
All right, let's hit it.
It's one of those things we all kind of have to just accept, because otherwise the game wouldn't really be that fun. And number 3 is teleporting cops. The exact opposite of the previous dumb thing. Yeah, it can be dumb when cops give up hunting you, but it's just as dumb when they immediately find you. We're talking about games where you go out into an open field in the middle of nowhere and firing a gun will cause someone to teleport behind you and start firing. Games like Red Dead Redemption 2 and GTA 5 can be kind of bad about this, but the most recent was, of course, Cyberpunk 2077, which barely even tried to disguise how it would simply just teleport police to your location.
Oh yeah, they
when
would
you
just
commit a
pop right
crime.
in.
And who can forget the stop citizen nonsense from Skyrim, where guards would just materialize through doors when you got caught trying to steal? Both of these things are goofy, but while making escaping from trouble easier usually makes open world games more fun, this example is more often than not just really annoying. It's like, just give us a bit of a head start, alright? At number 2, when time just stops for you. Basically, every open world game encourages exploration, but many of their stories have a time limit or some kind of ticking clock element. It's possible to waste hundreds of hours goofing off when the story says that you need to do something right now, and it doesn't matter.
Yep, that's
This
more
is
that
basically
ludonarrative
every single open
dissonance.
world game ever, but
Yep.
it's particularly noticeable in games like Marvel's Spider-Man, where Spidey's seemingly always in a rush to deal with whatever new
Oh, yeah,
catastrophe
yeah.
is hitting New York.
I recently
So it
finished
really
up my
stands
time
out
with
when he
Spider-Man
decides to take
2018.
pictures of random
Great
spots in
game,
New
but
York or
again,
collect
gets
back
into checkbox game territory.
packs. Far Cry
Oh,
5
really?
tried to change.
Sorry, I wanted you to have an opportunity to talk. But okay, I guess you're done, Mark.
Oh yeah, I just was mainly talking over the video because I figured, you know, we knew what he was saying there, but yeah, Spider-Man 2018 again. It's that thing where I started out loving the game, and I loved it for most of my play session. But then eventually I decided, well, I could continue doing more of this side stuff and get the platinum trophy, which I did. I actually did get that. But the sad thing is, by the time I got finished with all that side stuff, it just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. Whereas if I would have stuck mainly to the main story and just whatever interested me on the side instead of going for all those boxes to check off the map, then I would have enjoyed it more.
Alright.
But yeah, that's pretty much what I have to say about Spider-Man 2018.
That's fine.
Gotcha.
All right, let's
Play
get
if
back
you have
to
a
it.
chance.
So it really stands out when he decides to take pictures of random spots in New York or collect backpacks. Far Cry 5 tried to change things up a little bit by making it so story missions would interrupt your progress and force you to play through them after you've done enough in your area, but most people thought it was really annoying. So at the end of the day, this is one of those acceptable breaks from reality that exist to make games maybe a little less frustrating. Like, imagine a game where you're constantly on a time limit. It'd be really stressful, right? Alright, so Dead Rising does that, but that's a gimmick. I don't know that I would want every game to be like that. So this is kind of, by design, sometimes annoying, sometimes liberating. I don't know. Finally, at number 1 is when the hero has to do everything. Many open world games start off with basically nothing and force you to do everything. Collect stuff, fill out the map, hunt for food, craft your guns, get collectibles, just everything. It's especially dumb when the game takes place in a somewhat modern setting, like why do Assassin's Creed characters need to uncover a map of London?
You want to know what game did this really well? State of Decay. So it would give you an
I haven't played that
ensemble.
one.
Yeah, so it would give you an ensemble cast of characters that you would pick up through your time in the game, and as you would play as each character, you would increase their skills, but they would also get tired. So then you would be forced to play as other characters. So
Well,
like,
that's pretty.
yeah, so you weren't stuck playing as one hero character, and that's another open world, it's open world zombie game. So yeah, it was a lot of fun from what I remember. It's been a while since I played it, but yeah, that's a game that kind of like took this problem and made it not a problem.
Yeah, it's a
I
cool
was gonna
idea.
say too, yeah, because especially for like Assassin's Creed, like you're going back into a historical place, but they should have access to maps from those historical places. So why do I need to mount every, tower that's above,
Yeah.
20 feet and dive down to a bale of hay to figure out what this place looked like? It seems a
Like,
little.
that's how we designed the map, and
It's
that's what we want you to
That
do.
was one of the reasons that like the very first Assassin's Creed, while a revolutionary game at the time, became a very repetitive experience because it was all right. Go to this town, go visit the Assassin's Bureau, the Assassin's Guild Bureau, and then scale several towers, follow your target, pickpocket them, go kill this person, go to the next town, check out all the
Exactly.
tower. Yeah,
Yep. Yeah, that was that definitely is the experience with the first Assassin's Creed. That was a game that I was very, very excited for
yep,
before it came out, and I was still happy with it, but there's definitely a lot of repetition there.
of course,
all right.
absolutely. But yeah, let's finish this out, shall we?
All right,
Yeah,
go
let's
for it.
round it out.
You'd think they would know the general layout of London. Or like in Far Cry games where you need to hunt animals to make upgrades for your equipment. Like, why do I need to kill a bunch of critters to make my wallet bigger? Or like in Fallout 4, where you're basically single-handedly responsible for defending every settlement in Commonwealth pretty much by yourself. You need to staff them, equip them with weapons when need be, and you need to defend them from raiders and super mutants. Basically, the Minutemen are supposed to be an entire faction dedicated to defending people, but all they really do is just call you up whenever there's any trouble. Even in games like Assassin's
Yeah, they're completely useless. There's no point in having the Minutemen because they don't
Another
do shit.
settlement needs your help.
Hey.
Preston Garvey calls you up. Hey, you want to go bowling, Nico? Wait, wrong game.
Yeah, it's just like, hey, yeah, you're in charge, but I still need you to do fucking everything. There's no what's the word I'm looking for? Fuck. It's
Competence in any of the NPCs.
well, but Russell, it's where you go and you delegate. That's the word I'm looking for. There's
Yeah,
absolutely
actually,
no
as a matter of fact,
delegation.
I kind of wish there were more open world games that allowed you to kind of have that kind of control over. Because in a realistic experience, you build up a settlement and there's people there to defend it. They're not going to be calling you every 5 seconds, and you won't be able to go certain places every five
Yeah,
seconds to
this
go
is
defend a place.
important. You know what? Damn it! I spent my iron scraps and my springs and my batteries and whatever the hell else I had on hand, and I built you a turret. What are you gonna do for me? You know? Why do I have to come defend you every 15 minutes?
The least you could do is shoot the things with the turret that I made, so you could shoot the things.
Yeah.
But the thing is that that it always seems like while the game is getting caught up and giving you the full experience of the entire game, it would be nice to see a situation where like you spent time building a place and making sure that there were people there to take care of it or people to do certain things, and believe it or not, they actually do the thing without you having to babysit them the entire time. And there's not a whole lot of games I've seen that handle something like that, and it's kind of a shame actually. It'd be nice that, like, as the scope of the game broadens out, you know, you can either worry about everything individually or take the time, do the side quests, and, spend the time building up the things so people can make it more convenient for you.
Funny enough, the game genre that does that exceptionally well is exactly the opposite of what we're talking about here with the open world games. Think about first person shooters where you're on this tight little box of a map. And, I think of like our experience playing games like Battlefield, where like,
Mhm.
all right, one person could be like reinforcing all the stuff on the base, and one person could be sniping, and one person can be healing all the teammates. And like, you could focus on that one thing you do really well and trust that, provided you're on a good team and you have good teammates with with a good online connection.
Most
that, like,
likely, all your
other
teammates are going to be standing in a corner with their hands on their dicks. But in
Well, yeah,
an
but
ideal
like,
world,
like
yeah.
if you get like in our case, we have like a nice coordinated thing that we play together. So like everyone kind of gets their own little sort of, as Joe said before, like delegated jobs. Like,
Right.
and I know for me, speaking from experience of just being completely crap at shooters. So like I spend all my time when we play games like that, like I'm like fixing Enrico's tank or like trying to keep everybody
Reviving
alive
people.
and like
Yep.
doing all the other stuff. And like I feel like I can do those things and trust that we will still succeed because then there's other people on the team that can handle the other stuff.
I
Good
wish a single
medics,
player
good
game could
monsters.
actually do that. That would be
Yeah,
fantastic.
that same experience you could only get multiplayer. That would be kind of cool. Like if there was like, because that devs are capable of that level of programming of like, all right, here's a guy that's actually gonna man that turret and be competent and kill enemies with it.
Absolutely.
Like it's definitely doable. I'm trying to
Oh
think
yeah,
of examples.
the
I
enemies
feel
do
like
it to the
there's
player all
examples.
the time. They'll mow you down with to.
Yeah. Yeah, they have absolutely about no compunctions about stacking up things that should be unrealistic against you. It would be nice if the people on your side had a little bit of that same advantage, just a little bit.
Well, I
Yeah,
mean,
just a smidge.
just to kind of piggyback off of what you were saying, Dan, like they certainly do have the technology. I mean, kind of slightly unrelated, but Russ, you're probably going to agree with the statement, but sports games already do that, where like you can build a team and sim the games, and I mean, clearly it'll just be spreadsheets, but still, like you can assume through that simulation of the game that you had the players play that they did what they were supposed to.
Oh, absolutely, you're right, and that's actually a really good point you mentioned sports games too, because it makes it feel like, especially if you're playing a game where you're being like the general manager. Like for example, I'll use NHL as a good example. If you spend the time drafting the players and putting in the right places to develop and signing players, when you go to simulate the games, they don't just crap the bed. The better your team is, the more they can handle without you having to personally sit there and play through each game every single time. And it actually rewards you for taking the time and
Good
improving
management.
your team. Exactly. And I wish that as much as
You
I
could
maligned
totally do
sports
that in
games
open
for
world
their
games, and that would
yeah
be
as,
fantastic.
as much as I maligned sports games, especially EA ones last week, for their monetization, their concept of making sure your team is improved enough that it can handle playing against other teams without you having to do it personally is done very well. And I wish more games took that concept. Like I would love to see I'd love to see a type of game where you can build up a group of people for your side, and you can send them off on missions and be sure that they can actually handle it without you having to be on that particular mission every single time. Like the first thing that comes to mind is I'd love to see a Star Wars game where you get to be like, a commander or a general or something like that. Either in the naval forces or the army or something to that extent, ground forces, where you could spend time training other officers, subordinates who could handle small missions that need to be done, and you don't have to handhold them every single time.
Metal Gear
You know
Solid
what?
5 did that.
Yeah, I was actually just going to talk about Metal Gear Solid, but personally, I was going to talk more about Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops and
Mhm.
Peace Walker, which
Yeah.
were on the PSP, because they really introduced that idea of recruiting soldiers, and I really liked that element. It was almost another like it felt kind of Pokemon-ish a little bit
Yes.
because
Mm-hmm.
that idea of collecting different, just a whole army, it has that same kind of hook to it. But the way those games would work is you would go into a level, do your normal missions, but you could knock people unconscious, hook a balloon up to them, or in the case of Portable Ops, drag them back to the starting point or whatever, and you can recruit them, and they would join. They would join your team. They would sit. I think they would sit in like a waiting lobby or something because you had to like break them or turn them to your cause first before you could actually use
You
them.
have to brainwash them.
But yeah, you could convince them to join your side, and then you could even play as them if you wanted to. They're nowhere near as strong as Snake for the most part, but you could still play as any of these characters and equip them and send them on missions, which was cool. And sometimes they don't come back alive.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually a really good point too. I didn't know that Metal Gear Solid 5 did that, but there's almost something to be said for like having fun playing as like the second in command person who's not like the main character with plot armor.
Yeah, it's a new
It's kind of
twist.
it is it's a new twist, but it's kind of fun to do that because it's like this is like not my main person, but I can enjoy trying to take this person's shortcomings and like do the thing and
Yeah,
enjoy myself with it.
you
It's
can
really
even
kind of
level
cool.
those characters up too if they keep surviving enough missions. They get a little stronger. But Joe, it sounded like you wanted to jump in with something.
Oh no, that was basically what I wanted to talk about. Was that Metal Gear Solid 5 kind of did that delegation bit where you could build a team and send them off onto missions, and they would,
Yeah.
you
That
know,
would be a really nice solution too for Mark's checkbox problem. Like you have a
Yes, it
game
would.
that piles you on with tons of like repetitive, tedious side quests. You could like delegate some of those tasks, like a certain amount every day. Of like that way, it cuts out so much of the tedium of you going through and doing the same thing over and over again. You could send, teammate A to do that one in the north, and then teammate B to do the one to the east, and then teammate C to do the one to the south, and then you can like like you could do like one, but then get credit for having like 5 of them be completed, and it could wipe a
Yeah,
bunch of
that
stuff
could be
off
a
of your map.
solution. I mean, if like say if it's like Cyberpunk or something, and you have tons and tons of exclamation points on the map, and a lot of them boil down to just go to this back alleyway and mow down a group of gangoons. Maybe you get an item or something in a treasure chest. That
Yeah,
it'd be
that'd be
cool if you
awesome.
had like a little gang member or something to go help you out. And he goes and kills and wipes it off your map, and then brings you back
Yeah, and that
whatever
would
was
be
in that
so much
chest.
better than like Skyrim's like lame like companion thing of just have some schlep follow you around just to tank hits or whatever. Like I never use companions. I don't know if any of you guys do.
Yeah,
You remember Carjo, Dan?
I was about to say
I do
that.
remember Carjo.
I mean, that's the thing, and that companion system. I even avoided using a companion through the game because one, they don't hold their weight, and two, you're always worried you're gonna get them killed.
That's why I
Because
gave Carjo a bow, so he could stay out of the fight and be safe, and he could be
Yeah,
my cat friend.
yeah, exactly. Like you can't trust them to be like the main thing that'll hold their weight. You just trust them to be an extra little bit of damage done
Oh
on
my
the
God,
side.
yeah. But I remember finding Carjo, and I thought he was the man. Like I wanted to travel, but late in the game, I had to restart my save a few times because Carjo, he just couldn't get the job done, and there was permadeath with those companions. Sometimes
Yeah.
I'd walk into that dungeon and I'd be mowing fools down. I look behind me, Carjo is on the ground. He is trout mouthed. He is out of commission. Like he's done.
I see. That's the thing. Like you can't trust that they won't go and get themselves killed, and
Yeah.
it becomes the worst type of escort mission every time.
Yeah,
But you
I've
can always
never
leave
done
the house and keep safe.
See, like something I would love to see. I would love to see a concept of like this is never gonna happen. Of like an open world Pokemon game where you eventually become like the leader of a gym. You train Pokemon. You send people out to go investigate something and give them these Pokemon to take with them to deal with
Oh,
like.
I've been telling you guys for years.
That
I've
would
been
be
telling you
cool.
guys for years. I want a game where you play as the professor and have access to all Pokemon in one game.
yeah,
Yeah,
and you have
that
sex
would
with
be
Ash's
amazing.
mom.
Oh well, we just.
Oh yeah, that's actually the tutorial stage.
Jeez.
But
Professor
Well,
Oak
that was
used
my
Paladin.
childhood.
Pokemon Legends. They
Yeah,
did
that
like,
Arceus
what I'm
might-
hoping.
that
Yeah.
Arceus
direction
might be
of,
like that.
carving out this world and having this big open region to explore out the gates. I feel like it's not going to be like that kind of linear journey of like collect all the badges and beat the Elite Four. Like it's going to be like go out and like make the Pokédex from scratch for
Right.
this new region, and like
Like, I would-
I'm very excited to see what they do with it, and hopefully they talk more about it real soon.
See,
Yeah, I'm curious.
I would love to see a situation where you're like, okay, you've been exploring ancient Sinnoh with your Typhlosion because let's be real, who's taking either Rowlet or Oshawott? It's not happening. You're
I'd take
exploring ancient
Oshawott.
Sinnoh with. Listen, you know what? It's been nice having you here, but you need to leave right now.
Am I getting kicked off my own podcast?
You're getting kicked off your own podcast because there's no way that Oshawott or Rowlet are going to be more entertaining than taking Cyndaquil. So I don't
Fire
even.
Badger.
Exactly. Fire Badger doesn't give a crap. Anyway, the point is, it would be nice if you were like, I've been traveling around with Typhlosion with me, but now I have a person who's going to help me also explore different areas. I spent some time training this, it's Sinnoh, so what's a good, powerful Sinnoh Pokemon that isn't Garchomp, Danton?
Oh, I was just gonna say Garchomp.
Alright, fine. I spent this time
Gallade?
training...
Pelipper.
okay, Gallade.
Sentret.
Ooh, so close.
Magikarp.
Sentret Ferret.
Here, take this Magikarp.
I spent time training this Carnivine. Here, take this to this. But no, you hand it to them. I know. I spent time training the Staraptor. Here, I need you to take this to like the top of a mountain and go check out this area for like this, Pokemon that's been rumored to be, running around the area. It would be awesome to be like, I trained this Staraptor, so here, you take this out here and go take care of this. I'll go this way with the Typhlosion and go burn the eastern half of the region down.
Report like, oh, I found this sort of thing, but you have to still go actually to get it once they discover it.
Right, something like
Or
that would be a
something like
really
that.
cool concept because there are certain games that do this well. Like, you guys, I've talked to you about the fact that one of my favorite Assassin's Creed games is Assassin's Creed 4. And I love 2 and
that the pirate
Brotherhood,
one?
to be honest. That is the pirate one.
Oh,
And
nice.
one of the reasons I love the game so much is that and while you're on the open sea, you can, fight other ships much bigger than yours, and you can board the ships, but you can also add them to your fleet to go do missions and bring back money or bring back goods to different parts of anywhere the Atlantic is involved in Atlantic trade, whether it be North America, South America, Europe, or Africa. And so it feels like you are able to take these ships that you fought to bring into your fleet and use them to help better your game. You don't directly get to go and play as that, but you send them off on these missions, and you also handle like breaking blockades with them. It's really kind of cool, and it's a nice little management aspect that I wasn't expecting in a game like that. After having played, the first one, the second, the trilogy of it, even though I never finished Revelations, and the third one especially, it's really kind of cool to have that aspect to a game, and I wish more games did that, especially
Yeah, that
open
would be
world
a pretty
games.
tangible reward for as you're going through the game. You can see you're building up this force that's actually helping you out.
Right. It becomes not a passive source of income, but it becomes something that you can either take as much advantage of it as you want, or you can not really bother at all if you don't feel like it,
Yeah,
and make it harder on yourself.
It leads into more of that player choice and how you want to play that game. You could still, play the game and, do everything yourself, or you can, invest that time to develop your team to go out and do that tedium.
Absolutely. I really hope Pokemon Legends does that. All right, let's finish the last of this because we're so
I forgot
close.
that we still have this video. Let's play it.
Assassin's Creed Valhalla, you basically have to build up a settlement at Ravensthorpe. Really, the only reason you need anyone else there to help you raid and collect loot is because you can't open certain doors and chests by yourself. Otherwise, it is all you. Obviously, this is an issue in pretty much any video game. The games, it would be strange if you, the player, didn't have a hand in making things happen and moving the story forward, but some games go way overboard with it, and it'd be believable if some other characters had some effect on things. That is all for today. Let us know what you think.
Yeah, he pretty much finished up his point. We didn't really have to.
Yeah.
Well, now we can say that we finished it.
That is true, and true to form, a 10-minute video, 12-minute video, took us an hour and a half to get through.
I do want to kind of bring it back though to and this could spark the next topic. Earlier we were talking about Metal Gear Solid 5, and I know there's probably a conversation to be had there, at least with with Joe and I, and it brings to mind the idea of games that were open world and didn't really need to be. I think we can all come up with examples of that. But yeah, do you want to start talking about Metal Gear Solid 5, Joe? You want to lay down the groundwork?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I really have to say is because the problem that I really have with it is it's such a great game. It's really fun. The gameplay loop is addicting. The actual gameplay of the game is amazing. Don't get me wrong there. But like the way that the game is structured as far as like the narrative, it leaves a lot to be desired, and the open world I feel kind of really takes away from like that experience of enjoying the narrative, or like kind of the lack thereof. The story structure is really all over the place. Like and aside from the game not actually being fully complete, and Konami was just like, no, Kojima, we've given you enough money and enough time, you need to put this game out, we're losing money. Like I get that, but even still, with all of that, it kind of left me completely underwhelmed. Like, you don't I feel like if you go into play the Phantom Pain, you almost don't go into it hoping for a good story, which is a real shame with a Metal Gear game, and it makes me real sad to say that about a Metal Gear game, because Metal Gear Solid is one of my favorite franchises of all time.
It's
like,
fantastic. You and I have both played, pretty much all of them.
Mm-hmm. And so, like, to go into a Metal Gear Solid game and not have the expectation of this is going to be the best story you've probably ever seen, it really left a sour taste in my mouth. I feel like the fact that it was an open world game really robs the experience of enjoying that good narrative, because it took so much time away from development to create that open world that the narrative really suffered.
Yeah, definitely. I'm right there with you. I also thought that the story was pretty weak. Not the most memorable characters compared to previous entries in the series. I mean, Metal Gear Solid's always been known for really interesting, eccentric characters, and that just wasn't too. It wasn't present as much in MGS5, and it's definitely one that really didn't need to be open world, because I got the sense that you have this big, wide open map, and you're going from, I don't know, fort to fort or to different strongholds, or wherever you're going. And when you're there, it feels like somewhere you would be in a normal Metal Gear Solid game. But in previous games, it would be linear,
Hmm.
and you would just go from area to area. You finish this area, okay, you go through a door, down a path, whatever it may be. Now you're in the next area. Here's your next challenge. You gotta figure out, okay, where are these soldiers? How do I get around them? How do I progress in the game? Whereas they just threw in this whole open world idea, and it just felt shoehorned
Hmm.
because now you're just like flying there in a helicopter or driving from place to place in a jeep,
Yeah.
and there's not really much to do of value outside of that. You're just going from place to place, and it's just taking longer to
Yeah,
play the core of the
absolutely.
game.
Absolutely. I mean, and there's not too many missions where you have to go more than a kilometer, as far as I'm aware. I think there's like, I don't know, I think maybe like, it has to be less than 10, where you're going more than a kilometer. And I think the one mission that probably takes you the furthest is the one where you get the honeybee near the beginning of the game. Um, but even still, like, the game feels very like barren, and there's a lot of wasted space
Mhm.
within the game where you kind of wish they did something with it. And it just,
Yeah.
like, I don't know if it was just a consequence of it being rushed out and unfinished, but like I said, it just had me so underwhelmed to the point where I kind of like checked out after you defeat Skullface, and that's like the halfway point of the game. And that's
Yeah.
kind of like where my point on story structure is concerned. Like, he's kind of been built up over, ground zeros and the first most of the game as your big bad guy. It would be like you
Yeah.
playing the original Metal Gear Solid and you beat Liquid Snake and stop Metal Gear halfway through the game, but then there's more game,
Yeah.
you know.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You're thinking about what it would be like if they added more to the open world and fleshed it out. Honestly, when I was playing that game, I was thinking, man, it would be great if they just took away all this extra space and just gave me what I would expect from a Metal Gear game, something more linear. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
That's
something
just
more like Metal Gear Solid 4, right?
yeah.
Where
That was a fantastic game. I love Metal Gear Solid 4.
Yeah, same. It's a shame that it's only out on PS3. And there was
Oh, they okay.
there was a little while back, maybe a couple months ago, Russ, you probably remember me talking about it, where there was rumors that they were shutting down the PlayStation Store, and there would have been no way of people being able to get Metal Gear Solid 4 digitally, so then the price of the hard copy game
Goes through
would
the roof.
would
Yeah.
skyrocket. And there's kind of like your argument for buying physical copies of games, because
Oh yeah, love it.
stuff like that is kind of like, I mean, I really like purchasing digitally because it's more convenient and you can like uninstall and reinstall it, it's saved to your profile. But like, there's always that thought in the back of my mind that goes, all right, well, what happens if say Valve goes under and I lose access to all those games that I had,
No, you're right. I mean, um, I guess ultimately piggybacking off what you guys are talking about, I think the issue is that for some games, the open world concept is very much shoehorned in, and it is sometimes to the detriment of the game. And there are certain ones where I feel like we can all kind of agree. Like, it sounds like the two of you are very much in agreement that having the open world concept kind of wrecked the narrative and pacing of Metal Gear Solid 5 to some extent. Is that
Definitely
correct?
shoehorned in. Yeah, I would
And
actually.
oh, go ahead.
No, I just want to kind of add on to the point that you're making about it being forced and unnecessary. I think we've seen way more open world games over the last 10 years than ever before, and I don't think it's just because of the technology. I call it the Skyrim effect. It seems like after Skyrim came out, that it was so mega popular that I think a lot of publishers realized that success, and they wanted to replicate it by making their own games open world. And then you see stuff like Metal Gear Solid 5 follow suit and shoehorn the mechanic into their game, and it just
Yeah, in a
it just
game that's
doesn't work.
supposed to be all about the narrative, that doesn't make any sense,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's the point, is that, they follow kind of the same suit of what happened in the late 2000s to, like, after the first Call of Duty Modern Warfare came out. Next thing you know, you have a whole bunch of games that never were, taking any, shooting mechanics kind of out of that page, all of a sudden following suit because of how popular it was. And because, unfortunately, you know, a medium like this tends to be a big imitation game, because if it sells well, then everybody's got to make use of it. I think the unfortunate side effect is that you wind up having games that actually do damage to their legacy of the series by putting a concept in that
That doesn't
is
belong to it.
exactly. And see, this is where I get the feeling this is a good tipping off point to start this, because this is where you and I vary about Breath of the Wild and Zelda in general. So I'm going to tip this off. I am not a big fan of the way Breath of the Wild handles Zelda in general, because to me, usually I like Legend of Zelda having a little bit more focused of a storyline, like, and essentially, and I've made no bones about it, my favorite Zelda game is still Ocarina of Time, as probably is for quite a few other people.
Yeah.
And while you roam around the region, you still have like a narrative that's going down. And not that there isn't one in Breath of the Wild, but it feels very disconnected to allow you to explore the region. And it is there are very much two schools of thought to this, because there are a lot of folks that are, of the mind that, well, the very first Zelda game really had not much of a narrative besides save Zelda, beat Ganon, and get the Triforce.
Yeah,
And
pretty much.
this basically hit a tipping point around A Link to the Past, if I remember correctly. Is that right? Something to that extent?
A little bit, yeah. They wanted to put a little bit more streamlining into it to give it a little, definitely a stronger sense of narrative and a little bit of a better sense of direction for what the players are supposed to do.
Right, and Ocarina of Time doubled down on that, and I would say arguably because of the fact that, you're talking about the first 3D Zelda game, you want to create a linear experience, so, you can cut down on programming time and space.
To great, fantastic effect. They pretty much made Link to the Past a 3D game.
Exactly, and you're not even wrong, and that's a good way to put it too.
Yeah, and I don't mean that as a detriment. Ocarina is one of my favorite Zeldas too. I love it to pieces. I've probably played Ocarina more times straight through, all the way, than any other Zelda, including A Link to the Past.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. There was a time in my life where I played
totally
that like once every year at least, and all the way through.
Mhm.
And I think the thing is that you have these two schools of thought that Zelda should be a open world exploration game, and another school of thought that says Zelda should be a narrative-driven dungeon crawler.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
And
it's
go
funny
ahead.
because like even before Breath of the Wild, there was like a lot of times like when the gaming community would have these kind of conversations about open world games, they would always throw in Zelda games like Twilight Princess and Wind Waker and Ocarina, pretty much all the post Ocarina stuff of like, all right, we want this big open world to explore and all these different places you can go. But
Mhm.
like for me, like I've never viewed Zelda games as that. I've never felt even stuff like Wind Waker. I never really felt that was like a true open world experience.
No, you're
In the
right. It
same
was
way that,
basically
like,
a
the
series of
traditional
different
open world
places to
games
sail
is.
to. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
like given like you have like all these different optional pieces of, I mean, like my playthrough of Wind Waker, I probably explored about 20% of the map because I just focused on the story. I did just the dungeons, just the story stuff, and I went start to finish, point A to point B, and that was my experience.
Gotcha.
Which was
Now,
probably
the
a
funny
big
part
part of
is,
the reason I didn't enjoy it as much, because I know a lot of people that like it say like, well, there's definitely a lot more to be said when you explore the rest of the sea and you explore all the other optional content. But for me, like the extra optional stuff was never part of the core Zelda experience for me. I never really got that comparison at
well,
all.
it's interesting because that really is like their first foray into a more open world style Zelda game, and they were able to kind of cheat the system of having to have quite as much on the map by, having it
Putting it
be
all
the
in
open
the
ocean. Yeah, exactly. And the thing is that taken at the surface level, what the game seems to want you to do in terms of exploration outside of the main quest, the game almost, and I know they're not the same type of situation, but it reminds me, or rather the other game, Assassin's Creed 4 reminds me of Wind Waker to some extent, because you spend a lot of time exploring, sailing around on the ocean. It's probably one of the reasons I like the Wind Waker so much, and the same reason that I liked Assassin's Creed 4 so much. But at the same time, the narrative was lacking to some extent. There were only, four and a half, 5 dungeons, basically, if you count the Forbidden Fortress as, like, a 2-part dungeon. There were, like, 5 dungeons, and then Ganon's castle at the end. And it became a situation where the game was kind of like it felt short. It felt short by comparison to Ocarina of Time,
Yeah,
where
I
like
remember I actually lost that Ganon fight because I went in there with like 8 hearts, you know, because I did none of the optional side content. And even if like doing like an Ocarina run, if you do
Mhm.
just the dungeons and that's it, you're still going into the final fight with like
with 13 hearts, I
13.
think. Yeah,
Yeah, 13 or 14.
exactly. And you know the great irony, of course, is that one of the most lauded games in the series, although it is somewhat divisive for some people, is Majora's Mask, the sequel to Ocarina of Time,
Mhm.
where if you didn't do any of the side quests in that game, you'd have how many would it be? What, 8 hearts by the end of the game? 7 hearts?
Yeah, maybe only 7
Yeah,
even. If
because
you
there's
did
there's
just
there's
the
only
core
4
quest
dungeons.
elements. But I
Yeah.
feel like don't they give you like heart pieces as like part of like the main quest as you're going through the game?
They kind of do to some extent, but that's one of the
You'll
games where I've
probably
seen.
have like 8, most
Yeah,
likely.
and
But
that's
yeah, that's funny.
it's kind of a weird situation because that game is lauded as actually being one of the best ones in the series from a narrative standpoint, but it's because of like the covert narrative, not the overt narrative. People who love games to have a psychological element to it love Majora's Mask because it's the whole 5 stages of grief and Link is dead and it's game theory all over again.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the way Ocarina of Time handled the narrative was, you had a clear-cut bad guy, and he's built up throughout the entire game. And the first time you encounter him, when you're as a kid, right before you get the Ocarina of Time and get the Master Sword, he just
One shots you.
he just
Pushes
one-shots
down
you
the
with a
ground,
tiny
and
little
it's
magic,
static and storms
spark
off
ball.
and then conquers the world.
Yeah, exactly. And the
And then
thing
you
is that
wake up 7 years later, and then you have this insanely deeply rooted drive to continue. And
right, and
"All right,
that's the thing is
I'm gonna
that
wreck this guy."
and the drive there was that like I was about to basically hit the point where I would, become more powerful as a hero, and the lore of the series basically said like, "Hey, you were too young to wield the Master Sword, so we, put you to sleep for 7 years." And Ganondorf walked on in and bogarted the Triforce while you weren't looking.
The
And
real tragedy is that Link never got to get his first kiss from Zelda as a kid. That's the real revenge story. That's the real arc there. It's not about
this is
saving the
this is why
world.
there's
There's
3
actually a
timelines.
number of different theories that would totally shoot that out the window, but I won't go there.
Gotcha. But no, I mean, at the same time, like, there's some real animosity built up towards this, and especially not even from things he necessarily does, because you don't really encounter Ganondorf until the very end of the game as adult
Yeah,
Link, but you
but you
see
encounter
the results
him-
of what he did.
Yeah, you encounter him secondhand. You go to Zora's Domain and it's all frozen over. You go to Lon Lon Ranch and it's taken over by the Underling. You go to Kokiri Forest and it's swarming with monsters and the Deku Tree is dead. And it's like, and all that stuff, even though you don't even see Ganondorf's face and you seldom even hear his name throughout the
Mhm.
whole second half of the game, you know it's him and you know he's behind it. And you
Exactly.
hate this guy.
There's a fantastic video, and I'll see, Joe, if I can get you to add this into the description as we talk about this afterwards. There's a fantastic short form documentary on Ocarina of Time that talks about the power of subtext in the game, and that's one of the main things they talk about.
A masterclass of subtext.
Yes,
I remember
that's
that
it.
video as well.
That's a fantastic video.
Definitely add that. You might want to add the game theory video as well, even though that's really old at this point. The Majora's
Mhm.
Mask's 5
Is
Faces
Link
of
dead?
Death thing.
Yeah.
It's
Yep.
definitely worth checking out because it definitely sparks an interesting conversation regarding the stories of the Zelda games,
Mhm.
and while considering the gameplay elements of what makes them. Because like for me, like honestly, Zelda games are just a different genre entirely than anything else.
Yeah.
For me, there's like platformers and shooters and RPGs and open world, and then there's Zelda games.
Yeah,
they're
that's
just like their
actually
own
right.
thing.
They're kind of in a class of their own, and this is where,
You wouldn't just call it adventure?
yeah, action adventure, essentially
Yeah.
action
Action
adventure
adventure.
RPG.
That works.
This unfortunately, and this is where you and I are going to differ about this. And this is where Breath of the Wild slightly fell short of me, for me, because the game does have a
not
ton
you.
of, well, I mean, I guess
For
considering
many,
it's just
many fans.
right, and the thing is that like the game tries to basically show the after effects of what Ganon, Calamity Ganon did to the entire region of Hyrule.
I'm
But
sorry.
the
I'm
issue
sorry
I
to
have with it
interrupt.
is
What was the name of that other video so I could cite it?
Oh, the game theory
Ocarina of
one,
Time-
or
No, not the game
Masterclass-
theory one.
Masterclass in subtext. I believe that's the name of it, isn't it,
Subtext.
Dan? So, the issue there is that you see just by subtext of what happened to the entire region of Hyrule, what Calamity Ganon did, the Guardians being, a direct result of that. But the issue is that you never really get a chance to build that animosity like you do at the start of Ocarina of Time, because at the very beginning of Ocarina of Time, you hear about Ganondorf from, a few different people, including like the Deku Tree, and isn't there like a he doesn't.
Zelda
Does he?
herself gives you a
Does
whole
he?
bit on him.
There's that, and don't you kind of see it in like a dream before Navi comes to wake you up to go see
Yeah,
the
the
Deku
very,
Tree?
very beginning of the game, Link's having nightmares about him. He
Right.
doesn't even know who he is, and he's having nightmares about him.
And that's the thing is that,
Crazy.
like, you start seeing all this imagery that says like, hey, this guy does some bad stuff, and it's going to get worse because you see. It's kind of built up in the early, like, the first, like, 3 hours of the game, I'd say, essentially.
Yeah, totally.
And you start feeling like this general idea of like, hey, this guy kind of looks kind of shady, and he might be a bad dude. At the start of Breath of the Wild, you're told right off the bat, Calamity Ganon did
There's
all this.
giant blazing pig in the middle of the map that
Right.
just wrecked everything already.
And there's something to be said for playing post-apocalyptic games. I know, Joe, you're a big fan of those type of games.
Mm-hmm.
And I know some people enjoy that concept of it. I'm not as big a fan of it, which is probably why I haven't played a huge amount of Fallout stuff as of yet. But the issue there is that without having kind of seen the demise of the area due to Ganondorf or Ganon in general, it kind of feels very tough to be invested in why you should hate this person other than being told, hey, they did this, they're a bad person. And that's where it falls short. Had they done something to the extent of showcasing like the demise of the Hyrule region, like allow you to play as Link in like a Metroid Prime-esque introductory level, where basically, like, let's say they jump you right in to learning about the battle mechanics right at the height of their fight with Calamity Ganon, and then the champions fall and Link gets put into a slumber because of his injuries, then you have a reason to hate this guy because you saw what he did firsthand. When they drop you with it without having seen it, or having not necessarily seen it but interacted with it, it feels very uninvested.
Lukewarm.
Lukewarm is actually a good way to put it. Lukewarm, just like the color of Calamity Ganon. No, but that's the way I feel about it. And the unfortunate part on top of it is that while the first Calamity Ganon fight is fantastic, the Dark Beast Ganon fight is not very entertaining.
See, I'm actually completely the opposite as far as the final boss sequence goes, as far as how I feel about it. But yeah, I can see you make a really good point, and I think that would have been a huge improvement to like the build up of what little story there is in the game if they would have kind of given you like a little like prelude of like you have access to like all this part of Hyrule and you have the Master Sword and the champions are right at your beck and call, and then like you get all that stripped away and then you wake up in the Shrine of Resurrection and then start the game proper after like a short like 3 to 5 hour romp, and you lose everything you have and you got to collect it all back. Like, I get why they did what they did with the whole amnesia bit of like, all right, the main focus of this game is exploring the world of Hyrule, so let's use that as a vehicle for everything, including uncovering the game's story. So, like, it's definitely a sensible move of what they did and how they did it, and you can understand why they did it. But yeah, as much as Breath of the Wild is a 12 out of 10 for me, and it's probably my favorite Zelda game ever, I will admit that the story totally blows, and there's not really much of a story to that game at all. And a lot of the magic, it's funny now because I started playing through Twilight Princess again, both in a co-op playthrough with a friend, as well as revisiting my file on my own, and like going through and like seeing all like the real iconic story beats of that game's progression, and like all like even like all like some of the tedious in between dungeon stuff. All of that stuff has great story content, and it definitely it shines a glaring light on the absence of that in Breath of the Wild. In a way that I didn't see before, because I mean, since it dropped in 2017, that's been pretty much the only Zelda game I played excessively since, and still I'm still playing my file. I'm still trying to get all the rest of those damn Korok seeds. Because I'm crazy. I forget exactly how many, but like almost 500 now.
Oh jeez.
I'm a little more than halfway there. I'm going slowly but surely. I'm collecting them. I want
I'll see
that
you in
golden
5 years.
turd, damn it. I want the golden turd.
But I mean, see, that's the thing is that you know what, uh, uh, you know what I feel about. I no, I can't say that because that's not. I was gonna say I feel about Breath of the Wild as a Zelda game the way I feel about The Last Jedi as a Star Wars movie, but that is too harsh a consideration.
Say, don't go that hard.
No. What I mean is that
You
I
don't
was
hate
gonna.
the game, do
No,
you?
I don't. What I was gonna say is I think Breath of the Wild is a decent Zelda game. I think if it weren't tied to the Zelda storyline and lore, it would be an absolute smash hit regardless. And I think I don't know if I completely feel that way entirely, like 100%, but because you don't have those, if you weren't tied to the Zelda lore and the Zelda series, you wouldn't have those story beats you'd have to hit to get the familiar Zelda feeling out of it. And the reason I say that with The Last Jedi, I know that evokes some, different connotations because of my not so well hidden hatred for that movie. But the movie
Everyone
itself,
hates that movie.
not a bad movie if it wasn't a Star Wars movie. It just wasn't a good Star Wars movie.
No, I in my time, like, kind of like chewing up that movie. I know this is a side tangent, but like I don't even think it's that great of a movie anymore.
No, I mean it wasn't terribly well put together at the time, but it is a worse Star Wars movie than it is just a movie. And maybe that was a
I
harsh
already beat the Lord of the Rings beehive earlier. I don't know if we want to talk in Star Wars here.
Oh no, I'm not going to get into that. And like I said, that might have been too harsh a comparison. I really meant more of it to do more of an analogy sense than anything else. So that was probably a harsh comparison on my part.
Yeah, but I see what you're saying though. Like Breath of the Wild is like a fantastic open world adventure game, and it's really
absolutely,
cool. But as a
absolutely
Zelda game, it falls short because it lacks so many of the elements that fans of
makes a
comics
Zelda game
expect.
a Zelda game.
And
So
like
it's-
since Ocarina, like that whole like generation or that whole I guess you could say era of like Ocarina formula infused Zelda storytelling that is.
Yeah, because I mean, we had how
been
many
a
games
main
that followed
part of
that?
every main series Zelda game.
So maybe it's the Resident Evil 5 of Zelda games for you. Because that's how I
Yeah.
feel about Resident Evil 5. I remember thinking I haven't played it in years, but I thought, really cool game, but not a good Resident Evil.
Yeah.
See, that's how I feel about the Wind Waker. Where like, all right, it's like if Wind Waker was like not a Zelda game, if it was like a cute little like chibi pirate game, and like that, you're like a little pirate with like a little pistol, and you get to like sail around this big open world and like explore islands and stuff. I would love that. That's what Sea of Thieves is. Sea of Thieves is Wind Waker minus the green suit and the Master Sword, and it's awesome.
Yeah,
so like it's funny because
see
like I'll sit here and like go get on the box about how much I was really disappointed by my Wind Waker playthrough, and I get that I didn't really give it like the fairest trade of like not getting all the optional content and just focusing on the main story. So I know I kind of shorted myself a bit, but at least I did still play it start to finish. But like see like the game, the way it was designed, it didn't incentivize me to want to go out and try to explore all the other stuff. Because like the few times I did, to find like a little like fishing hole or like an island or some kind of little monster, like a lot of times the rewards were usually not worth it. And I really didn't enjoy it. But if it was, yeah, like I said, if it like wasn't a Zelda game and it was like, oh, here's some cool little like open sea pirate adventure, I would have probably played it, and I would have probably played it a lot more, and I probably would have liked it a lot more.
Yeah, I think we all have games like that. As I'm finding out, like that's Wind Waker for you, Resident Evil 5 for me. It's like sometimes the series gets so big and it has such a gravity around it and such an expectation that
if it doesn't like deliver a 10 out of 10, it might as well just be a 0.
Yeah, if it doesn't meet those expectations, then it's like it might as well just be some other game.
Well, I don't know. I disagree with that a little bit. I think some franchises, after having multiple entries in the series that develop the lore that you're expected to see, I think they do earn some leeway with it, because Breath of the Wild to me feels like a great game with some missed potential. And I think the main area, besides the narrative, doing it all in a flashback style with like, what is it, like 12 different flashback cutscenes essentially, something to that extent.
So, yeah.
I mean, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more narrative, but I think the biggest departure of it that made it feel less like a Zelda game to me was the lack of full-scale dungeons, like the dungeon crawling aspect of what earlier Zelda games did. Like some of the favorite things I loved about Ocarina of Time, besides the story itself, was each of the dungeons,
going through the dungeons.
and they had their own feel. Like the forest temple. It felt like you were basically, going through a like a manor or a castle that had basically been lost to time, and fighting these ghosts that haunted the place. Going through the water temple had a very kind of eastern feel to it. Even the fire temple, despite the original issue with the music in the very original version, had a very much
Yeah, you're like going through like
yeah.
the dark recesses of Death Mountain, and you're rescuing all the Gorons, and then you're gonna go fight this big dragon and have this really cool fight. I get it. The
They had a
dungeons in Ocarina are some of the best.
they had a cool aesthetic to them, that was really kind of cool. Like it was even cool, and I hate the fact I'm gonna praise any kind of major part of Skyward Sword here, but
Skyward
there
Sword has some of the best dungeons.
it does. That's the thing. I feel like after watching the sequelitis video, I hate to praise Skyward Sword in any particular way, but there were some really cool dungeons, and one of them I think was the Ancient Cistern.
Yeah.
Was that the one that had like the thread that drops down basically
Yep.
into hell? That's
Yep.
actually
That whole like underworld segment and the
yeah, that's like
yeah.
some sort of ancient like historical tale or something. Not a historical tale, but like an ancient like parable or something to that extent. That was drawn upon for that. And I'm like, that's a really cool aesthetic for a dungeon like that, you know?
Yeah,
And
or the
that
sand ship, like playing with like the whole like time mechanic to like
yeah, it would
yeah,
have.
oh, that was
Didn't
awesome.
you have like a pirate fight on the plank, a mid boss fight in a small corridor?
Oh yeah, on the plank. That's right.
Yep,
That's
which was like that's a really
tremendously
cool
fun.
aesthetic. Yeah, and that's the thing is, that's what I felt was
Those
missing
cool
the
little
most from.
memorable moments that were basically non-existent in any of the Divine Beasts.
Right, like, the unfortunate
Feel
part
that.
was with the Divine Beast, like, there was no issue where I was like, there was no situation where I was like, man, this is cool. Remember, like, the Twin River fight from, like, the Spirit Temple in Ocarina of Time where you have to, like, use the Mirror Shield to
Oh, yeah.
capture their magic and then shoot it back at
Remember
them?
the Argorok fight from the City in the Sky where you're like going
Exactly.
across hats with the double hook shots like Batman and like getting
There's
on his
none of
back.
that
Was that
in
Twilight
Breath of the
Princess?
Wild.
Yeah,
Yes, it
Twilight
was.
Princess.
Oh,
Twilight
yeah,
Princess has
shot.
fight me
I
on
remember
this.
that fight.
Twilight Princess has by far the best bosses of any
Oh, no,
Zelda.
you know what? I am biased towards Ocarina of Time,
The
but
best boss
absolutely you are right.
was Zeta, though. Okay, moving
And that's
on.
Twilight Princess. So there you go. Best boss fights. I rest my case.
No, but you're exactly right, but
Mark, you
see,
confirm.
but as even though they were supposed to be like different regions and different divine beast versions of Ganon who
All kinda
corrupted
meh.
them, they just kind of feel like generic evil purple bad guy, and they
Yeah.
even have the coloration for it. That's the part that was like, wow, they actually went with
And
like
that ties right
the stock
into
evil purple color.
Before I went on my original tangent with talking about like the entirety of the Zelda franchise, the whole Calamity Ganon bit, I feel like that first phase is just so not a Ganon fight from any
No, it's
Zelda
not.
game perspective. It's just like here's just all bad stuff, and here's all the bad stuff you fought, just literally thrown into a blender. This thing has like 5 appendages,
Yeah,
and one of them's holding a sword, and one of them is, oh, remember when you
The-
did the fire thing and he had the shield where you couldn't hit him? This one has that too. Remember the guy when he's doing the lightning bolts? Now he's got this. It's just like they just kind of like lazily threw everything together about the different blights and made it into this. I mean, I get they were going for like this disgusting abomination of a creature that you have to purge the world of.
right.
But that's never been the essence of a final Ganon fight in any Zelda game.
Well,
You
see,
know,
that's the thing. It does like the nameless, faceless evil type of thing, and the
Yeah,
only
which I
tie to the
thought-
Ganon is like
I
the
thought
red beard.
failed tremendously. I don't like that fight at all. It's not really engaging or
It
it's not even
doesn't feel
really-
satisfying.
compared to the combat and the rest of the game, because like
That's
it's one of
the
those
part-
things
yeah.
where you get so spoiled because like all your basic monster encounters are so engaging and fun that
Absolutely.
this big bad epic finale just kind of it's like you're so spoiled by the end of it where you're like this really isn't any much different than what I've already
You know
been
what?
doing.
You know what the
time.
saddest part is? The Lionel fights feel more like a final boss fight than the Ganon fight.
The Lionel fights are my favorite part of that entire game. and
Absolutely.
anyone who knows me knows that.
Yeah, they are an absolute knockdown, drag out blast to fight them
They are
because
so
like
cool.
this is an enemy who, if you make the wrong move, you are getting stampeded down by this half lion, half horse, wields like this big sword thing.
half Pegasus, half.
Yeah, exactly.
Goliath,
And the thing is that
half-
like the first time you encounter one of them, it's like a pulse pounding type situation. Like, oh, this isn't going to end well. And everybody fights them differently. Some do the flurry rush. I got into a habit of doing the stasis thing and knocking them in the face with an arrow to stagger them, and then closing into attack, which is probably the wrong way to do it. But in a game like that, where it allows you to do it however you want, you have that ability to do so. Those felt like more of a fight that had a better focus than the Ganon fight prior to the final Dark Beast.
Yeah, now the Dark
And-
Beast Ganon fight, I know everyone hates that and poops all over it because he just stands there and is really easy to dodge his attacks, and you just gotta shoot the little
Mhm.
points on his belly, and then that's the end of it. And it's basically a glorified cutscene.
Right.
But I actually really like it. I think it's a really nice homage to how stupidly simple the Ganon fights were in earlier Zelda games, like the first one, for example.
Yeah.
I think they kind of purposefully made it as stupid as they did, as like a tribute to like the first Ganon fight, where like all you have to do is like stab him 3 times with the sword because he
And
just
with the
like
silver bow and
vanishes
arrow, right?
and runs around the room. Yeah, so you hit him, and the third time you hit him, he changes color from blue to red, and then you just shoot him with a silver arrow, and then poof, turns into ash, and that's it.
Yep.
It's not the Ganon fight that's the climax, it's the dungeon leading up to him that's the climax. You get to this
Right.
gold dungeon inside Spectacle Rock, and it's this crazy, insanely hard labyrinth of everything the game has thrown at you so far. It's getting to him is the finale, and I think that was done exceptionally well in Breath of the Wild because it's not. But by the time you get to Ganon, that's
Mhm.
it. You did it. You know, you've mastered the game and you
Right.
beat it. So,
Hyrule
like,
Castle in that
the
game is a
final
fantastic
boss is
dungeon.
really Hyrule Castle. It's getting
Right.
to that fortress and having all these guardian turrets all over the place, having the Lionels in the gatehouses, having all the monsters polluting the place, and just trying to get your way to the top because there's like 5 different ways you could get up there. That's the final dungeon. That's the final encounter.
And see, the great irony is that Hyrule Castle in that game was a fantastic dungeon. Had there been multiple dungeons like that in the game, it would have wouldn't say completely, but it would have massively changed my opinion on it. And that's kind of the shame. That's why I have such high hopes for Breath of the Wild 2, seeing as, the teaser from, what was it, 2 years ago now? 3 years ago? 3
I
years
think it was
ago.
2018 that they
It,
put that
it might
teaser
have
out.
been, yeah. And they showed, them exploring the cave, and all of a sudden you see like this energy hand into what looks like a mummified Ganon, or Ganondorf rather.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I really, really hope that this one takes the best elements of the combat and exploration from the first Breath of the Wild and combines it with the best dungeon crawling and narrative
Kinda gives it
aspects
a
of
little bit
Ocarina
a
of
return
Time.
to form. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, that would
because
be awesome.
with a game like the Breath of the Breath of the Wild, you could do a sequel that it's Breath of the Wild, just more Breath of the Wild, but a lot
I
of
feel like that
times
would kind of fall flat because it's
exactly
like, just play the
the
first one.
exactly the best way to follow up a game that's that groundbreaking is usually to go in a different direction.
Yeah, just like they did with Majora.
Exactly. Like Majora's Mask at the time was not a well-received sequel because we just spent,
So
last
different.
year playing this absolutely fantastic grand adventure beating Ganondorf, and what's the next
And it's
thing?
very
Oh, we
simple,
collect
linear kind of thing.
masks.
Yeah,
but-
now it's like, wait, what? We're not in Hyrule anymore?
Right.
We only see Zelda for the first like 5 minutes? Wait,
Where's Zelda?
wait,
Where's
what?
Ganon? Where's, and that's the
God
thing
damn it,
is, I would honestly say that
there's not
the
even really
game is
reference to the Triforce, is there?
no, I don't believe there is, as far as
Yeah,
I know.
what a departure.
Other
That
than
game-
other than the Ocarina of Time having the little Triforce thing, I don't even know if you can actually see that in the game. It may not be on the model itself.
I don't think it is.
There's no reference to it beyond you exploring the Lost Woods at the very start of the game. That's it. And the thing is that, at the time it wasn't well received, but that game theory video did very much do a lot to remake the image of that game into more of a psychological story than rather a weird, quirky follow-up to Ocarina of Time that was done in a year,
Yeah.
So,
It's
I
still
mean,
on my
that's
list. I do
it's
have
great.
a copy of it now.
It
Oh,
is
Majora?
it's a fantastic
Yeah,
game.
yeah. One of my friends had a spare copy, so he gave it to me.
Oh, there you go.
You want to talk about a game that relies on its side quest to fill out the story. That is actually probably one of the best examples of a game where the side quests actually do a great deal to fill the story of the game and
Yeah.
complete character development.
And I found myself really wanting to really explore that and get all of that game's bang out of my buck.
Absolutely. When I got the 3DS version, I basically completed the entire thing so I could have the full entire experience, especially
Yeah,
down to the
right.
Fierce Deity Mask, which is a great
Reward
for
all
doing
that
everything.
stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
Your reward is you spent the time getting everything you needed to, so now you get to whoop on the final boss for standing still, pressing the B button, and just shooting
With this,
beams out of
like,
your sword.
Total, absolute badass rendition of Link that's never been topped.
Exactly.
It's really cool. It's a very cool concept.
That feels more symbolic to me as a good way to do a final boss than the Dark Beast Ganon from Breath of the Wild. Even though the way both of those final bosses are handled, if you have the Fierce Deity Mask and Majora's Mask, is essentially a a symbolic final fight rather than a true, okay, let's put all the test of your abilities to the test.
Yeah.
It's an interesting way of putting it, and kind of loops back to what Dana was saying about how, the dungeon itself was more like the end boss, and the boss is more like, I don't know, it's like a trophy fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. And I'm all for that. Like, that's not a thing that, is a bad thing in a game. Sometimes you can have a symbolic fight that winds up reminding you, like, hey, this is how far you've come to get to this point. As a matter of fact, I would almost venture to say that the end of the very first, Pokemon games, Red and Blue, is actually slightly symbolic when you fight your rival, because you spent the
One
entire
of the
game
best
with him.
final bosses in
Yeah.
gaming history.
Yeah,
I'm
you
not
spent the
afraid to say
entire
it.
game seeing that, like, the guy has beat you to every gym, beaten every gym before you, is able to have a team that rivals yours, or if you don't be diligent about your training, can whoop on yours without, being careful about it. And then you go up against him and you have this symbolic and yet difficult fight as well, where you basically show that your method of going through the game was better than his rush through and get every powerful Pokemon and rush to being the champion. And even
You're leaving
Professor
out
Oak
a
says at the
crucial
end, like,
detail.
yeah, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Not to mention that, like, the quote unquote final boss of the Pokemon, the first Red and Blue game, is the Elite Four.
Right.
So that's what the whole game is building up to. Like, that's the final challenge. You got to beat these top 4 trainers that you never meet until you're allowed to go in
Mhm.
after clearing the game. And you do the Elite Four, and then you get to the last one, Lance, the Dragon Master, and he's super, super hard. And then you beat him, and that's supposed to be the end of the game. And then they pull the rug out right at the end and say,
It's like,
well,
you would
congrats
have
on
been the
beating
champion.
or at least you would have been if you got here 5 minutes sooner and beat us before the current champion. So now you have to beat him to dethrone him and claim the proper title.
And
This
of
whole, like,
course,
every
it's
other
your
game
rival.
since, it's always been the Elite Four and the champion. Like, you
Right.
know from the outset, you got to fight the 4, then you got to fight the champion. Red and Blue, they don't actually tell you that
Until the
you
very
get
end.
4. And it's like a surprise, and it's like, psych, no, that bully rival that's been pestering you the entire time, he
Beat
got
you
here
to the-
first. He did it. So
Yep.
now you got to fight him. And then he has this whole monologue and how he's the best trainer in the world and he's the
You
most
assemble the
powerful,
best
and
team,
he's
and
gonna
yeah.
kick you down, and he's like all this trash talk, and then it starts, and it's just such a tremendous build up to that
It's
final.
like,
And here's the best part.
It's when you're telling that kid in class to meet me at the flagpole at 3 p.m. and then they show up.
Yes,
Yeah.
It's on. It's on.
Pokemon
then-
captures that feeling so
And then,
well.
and then here's
in
the
Red and
thing.
Blue.
Here's the even better part. You beat him, and his grandfather, Professor Oak, shows up and tells him, "Yeah, I'm disappointed in you because you never bothered to actually take the time to do your thing, do your journey the right way. You just wanted to rush through and finish as quickly as possible."
And you never call your mother.
That too.
Also, you
But, I
can't
mean-
ride bikes indoors.
Oh yes, that's exactly right. If he has to tell you one
That's
more time,
what
he's gonna
you
break your
have.
kneecaps.
Now's not the time for that.
But no, I mean, that's as odd as it sounds. That's a great way to do a symbolic fight where, yeah, it's still a challenge, but this jerk's been basically trash talking you the entire game.
It's the
You
game
wanna whoop on him.
started. It's the first fight you have is with him.
Yeah, exactly.
perfect. It's a-
Exactly, and
No, they've never surpassed Blue with a rival.
it's a rival. This is why every rival falls short in comparison. The only one to get anywhere close was your rival from Silver. And the unfortunate part is they never put the backstory that made him relevant in that game, was that he's Giovanni's son. So
Yeah, not
that-
until at least in the Gen 4 remakes they did that.
They did, but
even at
believe
the
it or
end of
not,
the day, he's just an edgelord, and it's like, all right, whatever, dude.
yeah, and that was about the closest. Every rival since then has been pretty much a
Sitting here
disappointment in
calling
terms
everyone
of.
else weak, and he has like a level 13 Zubat. Like, get over yourself.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like, you
You
know,
gotta
never
be
liked
careful
Silver.
sometimes. No
mean, he-
Screech. It'll greatly lower your defense.
It'll
yeah, that's true. I mean, look, it's Gary Oak, for even though it's Blue. It's Gary Oak. We all
Yeah.
saw him in the anime. We
Oh, yeah.
all saw the way he acted. I'm like, this guy's a jerk, but he's good. I can't wait to beat him. I can't wait to. It's like, he has that punch.
Yeah, that was the thing too. He was always really good. He was always a tough opponent.
He
always
wasn't
had a really good team. Was always well balanced.
he wasn't the friendly rival who's happy to lose to you. Even though I will say, and there's a little bit of bile coming up saying this in defense of Sword and Shield. With your rival, they took him from being the, just, can't quite beat you, but is happy all the time, to actually having a legitimate existential crisis in a game.
Yeah,
I'm
I
like,
actually kind of liked that. For the whole first half of the game, I hated him so much. Like this
Mhm.
character is so lame and so uninteresting. And then they did that little turn halfway through, and I was like,
Mhm.
oh, I actually kind of feel for the guy now. And it makes him like a friend, kind of like an almost weird inverse partner character.
exactly.
Where by the end of it, you're kind of rooting for him.
Right. And the thing
Where
is,
it's
like,
like, no, you're the best. No, you. Oh, babe.
but at the same time, like, I want to have a rival who like trash talks me, and I want to, beat them. And the first one from Red and Blue does that, but it does a symbolic fight right. And I wish there were games that would kind of take that concept and apply it, because you can really do a lot of good for a game's narrative by having a both symbolic victory and a literal victory at the same time. Where are we going?
Well, we were talking about Zelda final bosses and
No,
how they actually kind of suck.
No, but I mean that's a.
Does anybody have anything else they wanted to bring up about it?
No, I
Anyone
think
wanna
that was
jump in?
that was the big one.
I think we just kind of got into like the symbolism of like the boss fight from a narrative perspective. I think that was, and then we got on our little Pokemon tangent.
You know what? Tangents are welcome on this podcast.
Yeah, well,
This is
there
true.
we go.
Notice I didn't stop you.
I know you didn't, but I mean that in a nutshell,
No
I
wrap
think
it up
is
box.
why I had.
You better wrap it up.
Oh my god, this is why I have hope for Breath of the Wild too, because just seeing them show Ganondorf to me signals, all right, there's going to be
They
a
put a little
return
more
of
thought
some.
into that part of it. Yeah.
Exactly, there's going to be a return to form to some extent. And if they were smart about it, they'll take all the best parts of the exploration combat of Breath of the Wild and combine it with the best aspects of the storytelling narrative and
Well, we can
dungeon
already
crawling.
almost guarantee that they're going to use the same engine. You know, they
Oh,
spent
of course.
like 7+ years building that, and it worked so well. And it's the highlight.
It would be dumb not to.
Yeah,
Do you
they're
think,
definitely going to use that feature.
We got E3 coming up within the next couple of weeks. Do you think Nintendo's going to reveal that new Switch?
I don't know. I don't know if it's gonna happen. I don't know what everyone's getting so hung up on it about. Like if they unveil a Switch Pro, I'll totally get one. But
Mhm.
I'm
The
not
Nintendo
gonna like,
bait and
have a
switch?
heart attack if they don't announce a Switch Pro. You know what I mean? Like for me, like I don't care about anything Nintendo has
system.
to say that's outside of Zelda.
The games. Yeah.
Honestly.
I basically just want to see. I'm only watching it basically to see about Breath of the Wild 2
Give us
and
something
Pokemon
for Breath of
Legends.
the Wild 2, because it's
And
been
Pokemon
4
Legends,
years
yeah.
already. And
That's
give
about
us
it.
something about Pokemon Legends, because that's supposed to drop what, next year?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Dan,
Like early next year?
yeah, it's supposed to actually be in the wintertime or the springtime of
Yeah,
2022.
I'm just asking because it's relevant for me right now. Because as you know, I don't have a Switch.
I gotcha.
I've never played Breath of the Wild, so I'm just curious.
You can
I'm
get,
sure
you
if
can get
you
it
already,
on the Wii U. Do you have
if
a
you-
Wii U?
yeah, right.
Hey, don't just the Wii U. The Wii U is
I don't-
one of their best systems they
Well,
ever made.
I'm not trying to put down the Wii U. I'm just saying that I'm not trying to. If I did have a
Go
Wii
buy
U,
one.
I wouldn't play it on that because
It
I
plays
hear
just
that
as well.
Now, see,
I
I did
hear that
because
it
I couldn't
chugs.
find a Switch at the time.
I hear the performance isn't that great. I mean, point is, I would want to play it on the Switch, but
Mhm.
I'm just curious because I don't have a Switch. I've never played Breath of the Wild, but I've just seen so much of it, and Zelda's my favorite Nintendo franchise. So well, I guess Pokemon would be in there. They're just so different. It's
Yeah, you're really comparing an apple to a peach.
yeah, right.
Exactly.
Now that I'm thinking about it, just because like I don't know, like Pokemon's made by Game Freak. It's like its own thing, just made
Right.
by Nintendo.
Yeah,
It
but
feels
it
different
is
to me. It's
Nintendo.
not like
It's a Nintendo property.
yeah. I guess then I would have to say Pokemon would be my number one. But everything aside from that, the in-house developed Nintendo games. I guess I'm thinking about. Are,
Right. Zelda's
Yeah,
a big draw
For
for
me,
a lot of
I
people.
really don't care about anything but Zelda right now because they've been so quiet about the 35th anniversary, and all they've given us was a Skyward Sword HD remaster, which I'm really not too impressed by.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is that, it would be nice to see just a little bit more about the game itself. And
Give us some
yeah,
stuff on the sequel. Give us other Zelda's anniversary celebration content. Everyone's asking for like some kind of collection, like an All Stars.
yeah, go
for
ahead
this
and make a decent All-Stars game, and like for God's sakes, redo
and put
Ocarina of Time
all
for the
of
Switch
Zelda
and
games in there
Right,
instead
yeah.
of just 3 of them.
Yeah, I was gonna say that actually, Russ. Like if I'm a new Switch owner, I think that'd be cool to do. Even if they just ported the 3DS version to the Switch.
All they have to do, I would buy it. I would buy it tomorrow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
updated
no,
out
actually,
ahead of
on the
time.
Switch.
I'd play that. I haven't played it since I was a kid playing on the N64 original.
I would be perfectly happy if they ported the 3DS version, but just fixed up the music so it's not the N64 music on there. That drove me nuts.
Yeah, see,
Be-
I grew up with it, so I'm used to it.
I don't mind it as much, but after hearing like Zelda reorchestrated throughout college, I kind of have become a bit more musically elitist about that being
It'd be
like,
good to put in the settings, kind of like
yeah,
how like Master Chief or Halo 1 Anniversary. You know, you could like hit select or whatever and go back and forth between old and new graphics. And I think it changes the music too.
yeah,
Or maybe I'm thinking Halo 2. One of those.
Two, it
I
definitely
think
does it
it's
for two.
two.
I don't think
Yeah,
it does it
I
for
know they
one.
changed the music for Halo 2. But they could do that. You know, just make a setting. Do you want to play with old school N64 music or like an orchestral music?
yeah, I would love
Even
to
the
see something
graphics
like
too,
that.
do like the old school N64 graphics.
Yeah, it's giving the players a choice that's the biggest thing. But,
Yeah.
it would just be nice to see something on Breath of the Wild too. Because ultimately I think it has a potential if they clean up some of the issues from the first one. I think it has the ability to be probably one of the best open world game experiences in a very, very long time. Possibly even
And one
one
of the
of the
best
best ones.
Zelda experiences in a very, very long time.
Absolutely.
If it usurps the throne already,
Yeah, this is
I'd be
true.
down. I'm gonna get it either way. I don't care what they do with
Um,
it. Because
yeah,
it's
I will
Zelda,
too.
and I love it, and I'll play
Exactly.
it. But yeah.
Yeah, well, if they don't announce new Switch within the next couple of weeks, then I'll probably just buy one of the ones they sell now.
Yeah.
I would
Knowing
hold out.
Nintendo, the way they typically handle that kind of stuff is just the same way they handle the 3DS as well. You could still play pretty much everything with a few exceptions on an original one. It just is not as good as the newer ones, but it's still part of that generation of software for them. But who knows? They might surprise us and say like, "Hey, this is Switch Pro, and you can only play these games on there." But I would be very surprised if they would split the
I don't
fan
think
base
they're
that
gonna go
way.
that low.
No, they wouldn't.
It's
Uh,
probably just like it allows 4K, like better resolution.
exactly.
Yeah,
I've
better
heard some people say
functionality
it.
too. Probably not as much issues with Joy-Con drift and crap like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a whole
maybe. Yeah,
nother
I've
bag
heard
of
it has
fish.
like a strong. It might have a stronger dock and a bigger screen for the handheld mode.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would totally get it.
Yeah.
All
Well,
right, gentlemen.
I thought. Did we have anything else to say on the open world genre itself? We covered a whole heck of a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, well, I would say one one closing statement that I would have to say about open world games in general is that I think that they are like a marathon. And when you running a marathon would be, a big accomplishment, something you feel proud of, but it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of, preparation. You have to do a lot to build up to that, right? And when you see so many open world games out there, it just becomes overload. And if you're into running, you don't want to run marathon after marathon. Sometimes you just want to go for an enjoyable run, or something
Yeah.
smaller like that. Otherwise, it becomes too much, and that's where the smaller, more linear games come into play there. And they provide that smaller experience. You don't just want to have marathon after marathon because it's just too much.
I still say it to this day. One of my favorite examples of that is Star Fox 64. I can play that game and finish it in less than an hour, and instant replayability because it's a tight, focused experience in a game that needs to be a tight, focused experience.
So
And
I
I
feel
think,
about every Mega Man game because they're all super short. You can play them all in an hour.
yeah, it's not like you play a Mega Man game to play it for like 2, 3 weeks at a time. You
Oh no,
play it to
there's
be
like
like
12
done in
levels
an hour.
tops.
Exactly. You play it to be done in an hour. You play it for the start to finish experience. And you know what? Those games aren't, something where, oh, well, this would definitely benefit from being an open world. Yes, that's exactly what I want to do is troll around the empty space between planets and the Lilat system to find a random piece of space junk that some sort of space pirate or, some enemy by Andros has decided, I'm going to build a turret on this thing and I'm going to take it over. You got to shoot it down. No,
Stop
I just
giving
wanna go through
Nintendo ideas.
Yes, I
not
know.
to mention the spears and the dinosaurs. Didn't they try that for Star Fox?
Oh, good
Didn't they
lord!
make an open world
Star
like
Fox,
adventure
Star Fox
platformer
Adventures.
something?
They
Fairfax
tried.
temperatures.
Rare tried to turn Star Fox into Legend of Zelda,
Well, actually, no,
essentially.
no. I
They
was
did.
actually I
They
was reading
actually
up on
made
that.
their
They
own
wanted to
thing
make
first.
like a
They did.
dinosaur adventure game, and then Miyamoto
Miyamoto
came in
shoehorned
and
it
was
in.
like,
Yep.
"We gotta make this with
Yeah.
Star Fox, guys."
And
Yeah,
and you know what the biggest issue
they're
with that was
totally
too?
different
Besides,
characters.
oh, go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just agreeing. Yeah, like I heard that story that
Hmm.
Star Fox Adventures was originally supposed to be this completely
Yeah,
other
especially
game.
Dinosaur
Like
Planet was the
They
name
just
of
kind
it.
of
Adventure
reskin
or
it.
something.
I believe the actual like John Tron spiel went, and not to bring him up, but at the time the video was relevant. The whole thing basically went like, I see you got a fox in this game here. We got a fox. You put him on the game. He's like cocky little freaks, and that type of deal. And the thing is that, you know, that is probably one of the things that put somewhat of a permanent stain on the legacy of Rareware, considering the hit after hit that they had throughout the SNES and N64 era. Um,
Golden Age.
Star Fox is not a game that you can turn into that type of open world dungeon crawler. And the worst part is they shoehorned in the flying, and the final boss of the game requires you to fly. A thing you spent less than a half an hour total in the game time doing is how you fight the final boss. Because of course it's Andros, and it fights exactly the same way it does in 64.
That's just salt in the wound,
It's
honestly.
just it's absolutely worse. It is just a mess and an amalgamation of a game that didn't need to be that way.
Funny enough, as far as games that don't need to be made into 3D open world dungeon crawlers, I feel like they actually had a Mega Man had a surprisingly good outing with that. I don't know if any of you have ever played the Mega Man Legends games.
I've heard of it. I heard
They're,
it was
they're-
pretty good too.
it's
Not me.
basically
I think
Mega
I
Man
watched
meets
you play it.
Zelda. It's kind of weird, and I totally love it. There's two of them. Both on the PS1. Mega Man Legends 2 was like one of the swan song games for the PS1 before the 2 came out. So it's actually getting a physical copy of it nowadays is really hard. But if you want to play it, I have it, and they're actually stupidly fun. I actually really enjoy them. Cool story. It's a cool take on the Mega Man series. Um, it really effectively kind of blends it. It pretty much feels like a Zelda game, but you're playing as Mega Man. So
Now
it's
here's my question though.
totally
If
cool in
somebody
my
would
book.
if somebody was to say I've never played a Mega Man game before, would you recommend that to them as a Mega Man game?
Well, if they're like, "Hey, I'm like a big Zelda fan and I never played Mega Man," I would tell them to play that game first.
Okay.
Get them into the
I
franchise with
guess
something
depends what
that's
they're
more
looking
familiar.
for, really.
Yeah. So it depends on the player, really. It's definitely a very niche thing. Like there are a lot of Mega Man fans that hate it because it's not really like a Mega Man game. You know what I mean?
They probably feel the same way about like the Battle Chip Network games, which was my first introduction to Mega Man.
Yeah. For me, it was the X series and then the classics, and those are still my favorites.
Oh, of
Those
course.
are the ones I play just all the time.
But I think you bring up a good point. There are some games that are able to successfully introduce a much more open world or sandbox like concept to the game without it being a detriment to the game or the legacy of it itself. But I think it's far more often that the opposite happens, or that a game didn't need to be an open world to enjoy the experience.
Yeah, it's a lot of rough and a whole not lot of diamond.
Well, that's true. I think the biggest thing the game developers can do is realize, like, hey, just because this game was successful with this doesn't mean you have to do exactly what they did to sell a game. You do what fits the narrative or fits the feel of the game, not what you think will sell the most for it.
Or
And
if
as
it's
I
game design.
or fits the game design. And as I say that, I realize that it's completely a naive way to look at it because, of course, they're going to do what sells best.
Right, because that's not how the
Yeah.
game development and the games market works. You know.
Do we have to go back to Jim Sterling again?
Yeah.
But yeah, you're exactly right, which is a shame because I've said it before and I'll say it again. You can make a game that is monetized to bring in extra money with it, but nothing sells games like a good game.
That's what I said. Make a good game.
Yeah, you tell them, Joe.
Yeah, make a good game. That's
I would
it.
argue that's what Nintendo did with Breath of the Wild. They were like, well, here's like all these other massive open world franchises that are really big right now. Let's take all of those ideas, chuck them out the window, and make our own game from scratch. And they were tremendously successful with that.
Absolutely. Does it have flaws? Yes, but was the game
Yeah, it's not a
successful?
perfect game.
Absolutely.
I will concede that. But
Oh, I
yeah,
mean,
no, it's a
Ocarina of Time's
masterpiece.
not perfect either.
True.
But I mean, at the same
Very
time,
true.
like the game was wildly successful and correctly lauded as a kind of a new milestone for Nintendo and for, for gaming in general.
Yeah,
So
yeah, definitely a monumental achievement.
oftentimes the games that get lauded as these big milestone steps aren't always perfect games. It's usually the next one that builds upon it that is the best one. So it wasn't Assassin's Creed 1, it was Assassin's Creed 2 that, gets the legacy and the reputation.
Oh yeah, fantastic game. They fixed literally every.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They fixed everything that the first game had an issue with and created a game that has stood the test of time. That's still a blast to play to this day.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, anything else on the topic?
I guess all I really have to say is open world games are fun until they're not.
Until they're not.
They are.
Open world games are a good idea until they're not. Like kind of like what we've been saying all along. Like it just really honestly depends on what you're trying to make. And there are open world games that have been executed very well, and then there are some that have not been executed very well. And my biggest issue with it kind of goes back to what you were saying a little bit last week, Mark. It's all of these games are trying to get your attention somehow. And when you have too many open world games and too much of the same thing, it's kind of hard to pin down that attention and make you want to come back. Because I really like that analogy that you made not too long ago about running marathons is an analogy to playing an open world game. The last thing that I'm going to want to do after spending 50 to 100 hours in an open world game is to jump directly into another open world game.
Exactly.
Oh, right. That's why. Yeah, I think it is an important analogy because when you run that marathon, you get that sense of accomplishment. Similarly to when you're playing that open world game and you do absolutely everything and you're loving it. You finally get to the end. You really feel like you accomplished something. You took down something really big. But jumping right into another one, it's a bit of a daunting task. You don't just want to run back-to-back marathons. Sometimes you just want to jog.
Yep.
Hey, you feel a little bit of gamer fatigue.
Yes, exactly. That's the way I felt
I
about
just
like.
do some like mindless shooting for like a couple weeks and just do a whole lot of nothing.
Yeah, you need a cooldown period essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, that's why I kind of wanted to broach this topic with you guys because I just felt like there was too many open world games these days, and it's kind of a bit of a detriment to like gaming. I feel because, like we said, I feel tired of open world games. It's kind of like the old Angry Joe joke where he's just like, "Hey Joe, you want to play a zombie game? No, don't want to play another fucking zombie game. Get it out of my fucking face." Like that shit. It's like I don't want to play another open world game, but it feels like every year we've got like 3 or 4 more open worlds to explore, and while it's fun initially, it's just after that, new toy feel kind of wears off, you're just like, why the fuck did I buy this?
I just want a tight, focused experience that I feel like I can replay and
Fallout
enjoy
New
it.
Vegas, open world, but it's a tight experience, and you'll love it. I fucking gave it to you for.
Let's get him to the credits of Skyrim first.
Yeah, I gave you that game on your birthday, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. I handed it to you on a golden platter, and you're just like, all right, I'll check it out when I got the time. I'm still playing The Witcher 3.
Hey, Danton took 2 years to take a look at a song. It could take me 10 years to get to Fallout New Vegas.
It took me a whopping I felt so bad. It took me like 20 minutes to like sit down with it and figure out what it was. I sat on it for.
Sometimes you just have to be in the mood to start it because I mean, I'll be honest. Even though Fallout 76 wasn't exactly a perfectly well put together game, there.
Nope.
What was it? We played a lot of that last summer, Mark. We played a ton of that game, and I got kind of absorbed, and I'm like, this is a lot of fun. Now I've actually had the time to put into investing in this game, because to me, with those type of games, you kind of have to ramp yourself up to be ready to be invested in it for a while, because you don't just sit down and play it. and sit down and play it for 2 hours, and then you're like, okay, well, this is a cool experience, and then you come back to it a few weeks later and
Yeah,
try it again.
I think you'll enjoy the offline Fallout games because
Oh, I'm sure I will.
Picture 76, except VATS is actually relevant, and you
Except
actually
good?
have cities that are populated with people and their real quests and stories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think you'll like that when you get to it.
This is
In
why the
15
summertime
years.
is RPG, and the summertime is open world game time.
Yeah, for teachers especially.
Well, yeah. But
Alright.
yeah, I mean that's all. That's all I have to say about that. So
All
And
right.
that,
Well,
as they
they
say,
say
is that.
is that.
well, I
That
guess
it
you
is.
guys
I'm
want to
surprised
wrap
you guys
up.
haven't made that like your closing thing. for
Well,
the episode.
No,
You-
because we haven't figured out a closing thing yet.
Not
We still got to
everybody,
figure one
not
out.
everybody has played Final Fantasy X and will understand that very obscure reference.
that makes it all the better because you're going to have a small pocket of audience members that are in on that, and then they'll get the other ones in on it.
It'd be
Mhm.
like the
And they'll
Leonardo
bring two friends,
DiCaprio
and they'll
point
bring
Inside
two
jokes
friends.
are the way
meme.
to go on YouTube. I'm telling you.
And they'll
Alright.
tell two friends, and they'll tell two friends.
Right, because then like you'll get a couple commenters like what's that whole and that as they say is that thing, and then someone will reply like, oh, it's this obscure thing from 10, and then they'll put a link to it, and then that person will be in on it, and then you'll have like that much more of an invested following.
You know how it goes. The moment you bring up Final Fantasy X, all everybody's going to start doing is laughing awkwardly.
Which
Ha
is
ha
a huge
ha
disservice to that
ha
game, 'cause
ha.
that game is so much more than that awful laughing scene.
Oh,
Of
yeah.
course.
Love that game. Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All
I don't
right.
really
Alright.
have I
Well,
don't
I'm
have
gonna
much to
bounce,
say. That's
gentlemen.
my
Thank
closing
you.
statement.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I want to thank DocRocker91 for joining us on this 3-hour podcast. Have you ever
So very much for having me. I'd
Yeah.
love to come back.
have you ever
Yeah, thanks, dude.
been on a
Yeah,
3-hour podcast
awesome.
before there, Danton?
I have not.
All right.
But
Well,
it doesn't feel much different than the shorter ones that I
yeah.
do.
Well, consider your 3-hour cherry popped.
Yeah.
And
th-
how,
there it is.
what's your your music cast? Where can people?
Well, yeah, so I got two, and one of them I actually tag team with our boy Russ here. We do a teacher talk with Doc Rocker, where we pretty much do like an open panel discussion on music education. Various music education topics, whether that's more of the kind of grand in general, or we have a few episodes that are a little more tight focused and specific. So check that out. I have a channel. Joe, if you'd be so kind, you can link
Already
it
got
in the-
already
link.
got it in there.
Oh, that's right. You put it in from the first one. That's right.
Mhm.
So yeah, check out Pansy Podcast. You'll see the Teacher Talk playlist. I also do our Rock Talk with Doc Rocker panel with my cousin Jeff, where we talk all things rock and heavy metal, which is another passion of mine. Pretty much rock music and video games is like my life. So
That's most of us.
hence the gamer tag, hence the alias, hence the everything that I am of what I am and what I do. So there it is. Check it out if you're into that kind of stuff. We also have a Facebook group for the Rock Talk and the Teacher Talk groups, respectively. The Teacher Talk one, we're of course a little more selective. We'll only add you if you're like a music teacher, But as far as like the Rock Talk one goes, we'll add pretty much anyone who's into rock music.
Yep. Links in description. I'll even add the Facebook groups links to the description if you'd like, Dan.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for
Rockin'.
having me, and
Sweet.
looking forward to the
Yeah,
next
dude.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a good talk. I had fun for sure. We'll definitely think up another podcast that you'd be good to weigh in on.
We have to talk about soundtracks for games at some point, and that would be the ideal one to have you on for.
Sure, absolutely. I'd love that.
All right. And just to close things out, want to also thank my lovely two co-hosts, Ace X-Wing 88 and Marcamune, and I'd like to thank you, dear viewer, for sticking through the last 3 hours, 32 minutes. All right.
Bye.
Adios.
Yo, did we finish the stream yet?
No.
That's why I did it like really loud
You
whispering.
mean I should put my pants back on?
Oh,
I'm actually gonna go.
We got to figure out a way how to end this thing.
all right. Bye.
That's one way to do it. All right, gentlemen.